15th of September to approve. So do members agree that the draft minutes are an accurate record? Yay? Yeah. Yeah, 2 points. We're all in.
Thank you. Yeah, there was a question that was asked by the resident who joined us that meeting, and the answer was going to be given in writing, and I was wondering,
I've got them.
That could be added to the minutes.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
And then there was clarification asked for on whether that individual would be invited along to the task and finish group when victim lived experience would be gathered. I believe that was agreed in the meeting.
No. Well, I said that it had already been agreed that he was going to come to the lived experience because he's on one of the panels, isn't he? So it would be really good to hear from him.
Just was looking to see that reference in there too. Thanks.
Okay. Yeah, if you can make sure that's in there. Okay, thank you, Ellen. Right, we have no public involvement today, and there are no member questions. So, in this meeting of the People Overview and Scrutiny Committee, we have 2 items. First, building on our July meeting, where we discussed homelessness and rough sleeping, we will look at the draft homelessness and rough sleeping strategy. If you remember, that was a kind of intro into all of this, and Paul Nan went through that for us, and I think we had a really good debate about it. Secondly, we will be looking at the draft housing hate incidence policy, which will be of particular interest to those members who are on our task and finish group, looking into antisocial behaviour in social housing. And indeed, I suspect we're going to find many of the same issues in this, in the housing hate incidence policy about perpetrators and victims. So, members will have received an invitation to a special meeting of the People Overview and Scrutiny Committee on the 10th of November. At this meeting, we will look at libraries following the consultation on the library's sustainability plan. I know that special meetings can cause difficulty for members to attend as we plan things around meetings, but the team have tried to give as much notice as possible for this meeting, so hopefully as many of you as possible can attend. And I've already got one guest speaker lined up from Rottingdean to talk about this. And unbeknownst to my team, because it's only just been talked about, but he will be excellent. And I will see if I can get a couple more speakers, because I think libraries are very important and we do need to scrutinise this very carefully. Homelessness and rough sleeping strategy 2025 to 2030. And we have Councillor Paul Nan, Cabinet Advisor on Homelessness, back to present the strategy to us. And also in the wings, we have Harry Williams, who's the officer dealing with this. And okay, Paul, go far away.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Committee, for inviting me back again. I think last time I was here, I kind of spoke a lot about the stats, the situation in the city, we had a quite wide-ranging conversation about homelessness and rough sleeping in the city. As you said, Chair, today we're back to talk about this, which is our rough sleeping and homelessness strategy for the 5 years from this year. So this is a legal obligation on us to produce this every 5 years. I think I said that at the last meeting. So what I'm going to do now is just give you a brief introduction to it, tell you what you can expect to see in the presentation Harry's about to give, and then I'll leave Harry to give that presentation, and I think we're both available for questions afterwards. I think what this document does, and I should also show that this document is still in consultation. There's still a number of consultation events to be had with groups around the city and they will influence what this document finally looks like. But as we imagine it at the moment, there are three priorities in this document, and one innovation from previous documents that I'll talk about. The first priority is to increase our effectiveness in preventing homelessness and rough sleeping. So I think what Harry will describe are innovative ways that we're going to look at predicting who might become a rough sleeper or who might become homeless, and ways that we will intervene in order to stop them becoming homeless or rough sleeping, because I think the most important thing to remember about homelessness is that stopping someone becoming homeless is much easier than relieving their homeless once that's happened to them. The second priority is to improve our temporary accommodation, how people experience that accommodation and the pathways out of it. And that's really, really important. Temporary accommodation in the city at the moment is a huge expense. And that, I think, as I said in the last meeting, that's money we could spend on much more joyful things. And also, you know, we want to provide the best quality temporary accommodation we possibly can for the money we pay for it. And our housing cabinet member Jill Williams and our finance lead Jacob Taylor are already looking at a number of ways that we can reduce the cost of the temporary accommodation we provide and improve its quality. And this strategy will help inform that work that they're doing. And the third priority is to target those who are vulnerable. And there's a discussion of that, and I think it's worth highlighting that what we are specifically looking to do in this strategy is work to stop children and stop families becoming homeless, because that's a matter of huge importance, because if we can stop children and families becoming homeless, we stop an important pipeline into homelessness for people, and Harry will explain it better than I, but we've chosen to focus on those groups. And in doing so, we hope that they'll make a significant reduction in the number of people experiencing homelessness. So I won't bother you with any further rambling. I'll just hand over to Harry and now do the presentation.
And thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Nan, and thank you, Committee. So hopefully you'll be able to see a PowerPoint slide just up on the screen. And Luke, next slide, please. So just to recap, first of all, today we're here to talk about our consultation on our draft homelessness and rough sleeping strategy. As Councillor Nan referenced, we're carrying out a number of activities across the city to really engage with residents, partners and people with lived experience on their views about how we should address homelessness and rough sleeping within Brighton and Hove. And a big part of that for us is about coming to committee here today to hear your views on our proposed priorities and commitments within the strategy, so that we can really gain your perspectives and insights to help us inform our final strategy. And I'll come on to the time frame for the adoption of that in a second. So the recommendations within the report that have been shared with you are to note the findings of the review of homelessness, and also to comment on the proposed priorities and commitments set out in the draft homelessness and rough sleeping strategy. Next slide, please, Luke. So just to touch on a little bit more what Councillor Nan just explained, to provide a bit of context before we go into those proposed priorities and commitments. So as mentioned, the Council has a legal duty to review levels of homelessness and rough sleeping every 5 years, and then to develop a strategy about how those issues will be resolved over the next 5 years. The current strategy, our current strategy, expires this year, and we're working hard to have a new strategy in place for 2025-2030. Our strategy is aligned to our overall goal as a local authority in Brighton City Council to create a better Brighton and Hove for all, and really establish homes for everyone, as outlined within our council plan, but also our housing strategy as well. We're developing our strategy in the context of a new and emerging government or cross-government strategy that looks at how homelessness and rough sleeping can be addressed nationally. We're anticipating this strategy to be released or published towards the end of this calendar year. We haven't yet seen a version, but we're anticipating a real focus on cross-governmental working and also early intervention and prevention of homelessness and rough sleeping. And that's really reflecting the increasing complexity of need of people experiencing homelessness and rough sleeping, and the need to work across agencies to resolve those systemic issues that are causing homelessness. We're also developing our strategy in the context of increasing costs and temporary accommodation, as outlined by Councillor Nan. We're also anticipating reductions in government funding for activities to prevent homelessness, but also to support people experiencing rough sleeping. The review talks a little bit about some of the key findings, and on the levels of homelessness and rough sleeping over the 4 or 5 year period, and also references some research carried out by Shelter, which identified that in June 2024, 3,580 people were experiencing homelessness in the city, and that equates to about 1 in every 77 residents. And that's one of the highest rates in the country. It also found that 1,411 of those were children. In November 2024, in our last annual rough sleep account, we found 76 people sleeping rough, plus there were also a number of unknown people or unfound people in unsettled accommodation that we are aware of but don't fully know about. At the time, we had 1,827 households owed what we call a prevention or relief duty, 1,928 households living in temporary accommodation, and what we're seeing as well is an increase in complexity of people experiencing homelessness and what we call compound needs. So what we're seeing is people experiencing homelessness having one or more support needs, such as substance misuse, mental health, offending history, or experiencing domestic violence. That's making the needs of people experiencing homelessness and rough sleeping in the city more complex. Next slide, please, Luke. Just to talk a little bit about how we went about developing the strategy before I talk about the strategy itself and what we're proposing in the consultation period. I think it's really important to recognise that this draft strategy has been really developed in a multi-agency and partnership way, and one of our key principles is about how we develop that strategy with partners. We really recognise as the council that we're unable to resolve homelessness ourselves. It requires a cross-system approach to address those underlying issues. So prior to our consultation phase, we've done a lot of engagement with partners. We've done calls for evidence with lots of different organisations and done lots of early engagement. A big part of work as well is we've taken a really data-led, evidence-led approach, really using the data from our review to inform our priorities. We've been innovative in the way that we hope to address these issues, as Councillor Ann's already described, our work to develop a predictive model to improve our early intervention of homelessness. We're trying to achieve financial sustainability within the delivery of our strategy, just reflecting back on that context in terms of the Council's financial position. We really want to focus on that upstream intervention to prevent homelessness. We've really engaged and involved people with lived experience in developing our strategy, and I must give a shout out to an organisation called Common Ambition, who have really helped us inform not only the language in the strategy, but the priorities that we're proposing and how that would benefit people with lived experience, people experiencing homelessness. And we're really taking a public health or health-led approach in our strategy, and that really reflects what we're seeing in our data in terms of people with increasing mental health needs and physical health needs, and looking at how we can work with health colleagues, with care partners to really address again some of those underlying issues. Next slide, please, Luke. So here are proposed priorities within the strategy, and just to touch on them briefly, we're looking to increase our effectiveness in preventing homelessness and rough sleeping, and that includes things like our early identification of risk and early intervention models, supporting people to stay where they are or to find new homes, and really targeting prevention for people at risk of rough sleeping. We want to improve our temporary accommodation pathways and experiences, and as Councillor Ann's already reflected on, that's about improving our move on from temporary accommodation, better support to people living in temporary accommodation, and improving the supply and quality of temporary accommodation. We also really recognise that we need to provide more joined up support with partners to support people who need our help the most. And we're, in the light of that increasing number of people with complex needs accessing our services and experiencing homelessness, this is all about how we can integrate more with partners like the NHS or care to provide that better joined up service. We're also proposing within the strategy that children, families and young people chapter, as Councillor Ann introduced, and really that's reflecting what we're seeing in the national research about poorer health outcomes, poorer outcomes for children growing up in temporary accommodation, things like educational disadvantage, poorer health outcomes. We're really recognising that nationally and also locally within our strategy. The other really important point, I think, just to articulate, is that if we are to ever work in the really, truly early interventionist way, we need to be thinking about who is going to be our future homelessness population. And it really does start with children and young people. And if we can support those families out of homelessness, they're less likely to reoccur homeless to repeat at a later age. So it's really moving into that early intervention space in its purest means. And in delivering our strategy, we've got commitments about being fair and inclusive, really working in partnership, and of course, making best use of resources in the difficult financial climate that we're in. Next slide, please, Luke. Just to talk a little bit about our timeline for the development of the strategy. So we're currently in the consultation period, which ends on the 26th of October. We'll then be working on the consultation report and the final strategy with a view to take it to City Council's Cabinet in December for final approval and adoption. And next slide, please, Luke. And this slide here shows a series of different activity that we're carrying out during the consultation period, a real focus on partner engagement, resident engagement, engaging with people with lived experience, including youth voice, here today to gain the committee's views on our proposed priorities and commitments. And we're also holding a public event in this room on Friday to really engage with residents and partners on our draft strategy. Next slide, please, Luke. This slide here just shows a little bit about how people can respond to our consultation if they wish to do so. I think that's the end of the presentation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. I mean, it's a long report, but it's fascinating and a lot of work gone into it. And it's a lot to take in, but I do recommend that people do try and read all of it. Because as I say, there's loads and loads of really good information in there about the way we're going. And I know, Harry and Paul, that you very much want us to really push today about ways in which we can suggest things, or, you know, what we've got to say about this policy and add to it and so on. I know you're very keen for that. So I'm hoping that people will. I know, just quickly before we do this, I was going to say I was so pleased to see the emphasis on children. And I know that that is, you know, it's a national thing, but it's so important because children's long-term prospects are really damaged by living in temporary accommodation. They're kind of very difficult situations that can be caused by that. So I think it's very important to stop that, you know, thing perpetuating itself. And I'm sure members are very concerned about the financial situation as well. So I'm hoping for lots of questions about that. Also about what the voluntary sector can offer in this, because I think if you look at the report, there's quite a bit about working with the voluntary sector more closely and so on. So, you know, rich pickings here for people to ask questions, please. And so I will kick off. Who wants to ask questions? I can see Ellen smiling at me. So I know you will. Okay. And Adam and Julie and Joe, of course, and Raphael and Anne. Anyone else? Oh, okay. TJ. Okay, right. Well, Ellen, let's kick off with you.
Thanks very much. And thanks for presenting the report today. Really thorough and enjoyed the read, and really appreciate the emphasis on prevention. So one thing I wanted to ask about was on the previous 5-year strategy and about how much of that is being looked at and evaluated through this as you start to reiterate the next 5 years. Are there learnings that you can take from that? What are you trying to capitalize on potentially? What are you trying to improve on? Also, in the previous strategy, there was the emphasis on adopting the homeless right bill. So, the homeless bill of rights. And in March 2021, that is something that Brighton and Hove City Council adopted, one of the first cities in the UK, and I think still the only one, but they've aligned themselves with cities across Europe, so France, Denmark, Austria, Poland and Greece, and there's cities in the US who have also done that. So I wanted to ask if we are dropping that now. I mean, the Bill of Rights is based on really great principles, really based around human rights and giving the homeless community rights in that area, and making sure that they have, you know, basic sanitary facilities, basic equal treatment, access to emergency services and so on. So I just wanted to check if we are dropping that completely or if that's still a kind of a fundamental principle. And then also, I noted that the number of temporary, and it was referenced in the report, temporary accommodation fell between 2020 and 2022, but now it's rising again. And I wondered if there'd been any analytics gone into what was happening then versus what's happening now. Was that because of the pandemic? Was there more funding then? Was it more of a kind of a supply and demand issue? And with the idea of supply and demand and the LPS blocks coming up, I appreciate this is a strategy, but how much of that is coming into your thoughts about allocations going forward, and how this can really impact on those numbers and allocation queues?
Thank you, Ellen.
Chair, may I quickly respond on the Homeless Bill of Rights, and then I'll hand over to Harry for the more technical stuff, because I think you'd appreciate his answers more. As an administration, we remain utterly committed to the Homeless Bill of Rights. It's still what we believe, and we stand by it unequivocally. So I'll hand over to Harry.
Thank you, Councillor, and thank you, Councillor, for your question. So just to talk a little bit about the previous strategy. So I think some of the big learning from that, the big sort of emphasis behind that strategy is a recovery from the COVID pandemic. So looking at the priorities of that strategy and some of what's followed through, a big focus was on the recovery, in terms of how we're supporting people through the Everyone In initiative. Throughout the strategy, we also really improved our work to prevent homelessness. So as a council and as a city, we're one of the leading authorities in the South East for preventing homelessness. We also improved our work around sustainment and some of the principles there around tenancy sustainment and support for people once they have come out of homelessness. We also did a lot of work in recommissioning and commissioning of our sleeping services, really successful street outreach service, for example, and our Housing First service. So there were a lot of successes in the previous strategy, and we're carrying those through into this strategy. And then in terms of sort of the learnings from it, as I reflected, we are a leading authority in preventing homelessness, but what we really need to improve is our early intervention work. We're great when we're able to access and engage with people. We just need to get to people sooner. And the focus and the emphasis in this strategy is that early intervention approach. And then in terms of the other question in reduction in TA, so the data within the review and within the strategy, there are a higher number of households living in temporary accommodation in 2020 and 2021, again, because of the Everyone In initiative. Following that, a lot of focus was put in to move people into settled accommodation following that initiative. And that's where we see the numbers in temporary accommodation reduce over those 2 years. Since about 2023, 2024, what we've seen is a slight change in our, the cohort of people experiencing homelessness in the city. What we've started to see is a real increase in single adults with complex needs becoming at risk of homelessness or experiencing homelessness. And that change, or that emerging group that's reflected within our strategy, are one of the big reasons why we're starting to see an increase again in temporary accommodation numbers, because we're dealing with a new set of demands on the council's homelessness service. And then in terms of the supply and demand, supply of affordable housing and affordable rented housing in the city remains a real challenge, and that's reflected within the strategy itself. As a local authority, we're doing lots of work to build new council and social homes for the city to increase that supply. And this year alone, we're forecasting an increase of, we're buying 60 new council-owned temporary accommodation homes. So we're doing lots of work to increase our supply of accommodation, not only settled accommodation, but temporary accommodation. But it does remain a real challenge in terms of supply accommodation and affordability and being able to meet the needs of people experiencing homelessness in the city. And we're working really creatively with our partners and thinking about how we can support people into settled accommodation.
Thank you.
May I just quickly add something to what Harry said? I think in terms of what we've learned from the previous strategy, I think Harry explained that really well. I think what's new in it doesn't speak to a lack in the old strategy. I think in the last 5 years, innovations have emerged in the sector that allow us to take advantage of them. I think the two main innovations that this strategy embraces that strategy couldn't have are the improvements in co-production of strategies. While there was co-production 5 years ago, I think the organisations that facilitate co-production have really sort of been assertive about the need for it, and I think the council have listened to those organisations and have made co-production a huge part of this strategy. And I think there have been technical innovations in the way that we can look at who is going to become homeless. I mean, these aren't absolutely deterministic predictors of homelessness, but there are now models that are available to the council that weren't available 5 years ago that can be used to make those early interventions. And hopefully, I believe they're being trialled soon, and hopefully that trial will show their value and we can use them. So there are innovations that this strategy can embrace that didn't exist 5 years ago, and better ways of working. And in any field of endeavour, 5 years on from, once you move forward 5 years, you do get improvements in ways of working, and that's what this strategy embraces.
Yeah.
So on the co-production innovation, does that mean the sharing of data? Is that what you mean by that?
Not so much the sharing of data. That data's always been there. It's the kind of the way. So co-production is an old idea, but it's relatively new to the production and operation of homeless services. I mean, it's always been around. There's always been this idea that nothing about us without us. But in the last 5 years, it's really become more of less of a method and more of a philosophy, and that philosophy has now become really quite sophisticated. And the organisations that embrace this philosophy of co-production have really become quite assertive about it and really know who to speak to, how to speak to those people, and really expect from organisations such as the council that co-production will be a core part of it. And other organisations that provide services to homeless people and people experience homelessness. So I think the innovation and the skill with which co-production can be accessed now is so much different from 5 years ago, and it's so much more informative and so much more well done. And that's not to speak badly of the people 5 years ago. They were doing their best with a relatively new way of working. So that's what I meant by it. The data's always been there. It's how it's used and where it's got is the important thing.
I suggest my recommendation about if we are continuing to adopt the Homeless Bill of Rights, could that be stated and added in the strategy, or why are we not referencing it?
You mean the strategy should contain a commitment to continuing co-production of strategies going forward? Yeah. I'll hand that to Aaron. He's the writer.
Thank you, Councillor. I think today what we want to do is gather everyone's views and that will form part of our consultation report that we will take to Cabinet to then make a decision on the strategy. So I think if it's fair to say, Chair, that I hear that comment, hear that view. I'm really grateful for you expressing that, and that's taken on board.
Thank you. Yeah, I was going to say, when I read it, I thought the Bill of Rights was kind of running right through it, actually. So you almost didn't need to say it because it's there in the document very clearly. So, maybe take that away as well. So, Adam.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the report. It's incredibly heartening to hear the principles of support for child and youth homelessness built into the commitment to the strategy. The upstream attention means that through this strategy, though the strategy is built for 5 years, the impact is likely to be felt for much longer into the future. I wanted to thank the Council for supporting and endorsing the work of Clock Tower Sanctuary, YMCA Downslink Group and Sussex Night Stop in their innovative report on youth homelessness published in June this year called Here For You. For those who haven't read it, I invite you to get your hands on a copy. It gives the best insight possible as to the worrying state of youth homelessness in Brighton and Hove. One of the findings of their report is to highlight the relative dearth of clear data, specifically about young people. And I know that that's been highlighted as well directly. To strengthen the strategy, we'd like to see a commitment to better data collection and analysis to support visibility for young people's homelessness. And presumably, any predictive analytic pilot would require youth-specific data in order to be particularly effective. What are the ways that this could feasibly be built in, do you think? Thank you.
Let Harry give the more useful answer. I think the commitment to families and young people comes from the horrific truth that this city has now an intergenerational homelessness problem. And what I mean by that is that I worked in youth services, homeless youth services about 15 years ago, and I was dealing with a cohort of people that were homeless. I'm pretty sure that the young people who are homeless, I'm pretty sure some of that cohort of young people who are homeless have now gone on, remained homeless and had their own children who are now homeless. And it would shock me if there was a third generation of homeless people not too far away. And I think that's part of the reason that we've decided that this needs to be addressed head on. I'll hand over to Harry to talk about the more technical aspects of rename, but that's what's motivated us on this. So, yeah.
Thank you, Councillor, and thank you for your question. Yes, absolutely. And there's a commitment. Well, within the strategy, we recognise that there are gaps in our data around young people and youth homelessness, and there's a real commitment within the strategy to improve our data collection for young people experiencing homelessness. And we really hope to continue to work with the organisations you named to improve our understanding of youth homelessness in the city.
Thank you. Yeah, just to add in there, Harry, when I was asking about this, you talked about AI being used as to help predictions. So maybe you could add a little bit in about that, because it's kind of relevant to what Adam asked you.
Thank you. I will do my best to explain AI, but I'll share my understanding and talk a little bit about what we're calling the predictive analytics model. So this is based on a lot of national research that's going on around how can we better identify people who might be at risk of homelessness before that homelessness occurs. It uses data such as council tax data, benefit data to say, are there specific warning flags that someone might fall into homelessness? So, for example, their benefit claims suddenly change and they're no longer in receipt of benefit, they lose that income. There's a probability there that that person might not be able to pay their rent or might not be able to sustain their tenancy in some way. That gives us a bit of an indication, in addition to other warning factors or flags, that helps paint a picture that this individual might be at risk of homelessness. That then gives us a bit of an opportunity to try and reach out and engage with that individual to give a bit of advice and support about how we could help resolve that issue. So it's pulling all sorts of data together from the council systems, but also systems from different organisations to really understand what are the factors that could result in homelessness and how we then are able to use AI to identify people who then might be at risk of homelessness. This is relatively new thinking, but it is well established within the sector, and there are other local authorities who which have adopted a similar model, and that's really what we're looking in developing within our strategy, and something that we're piloting at the moment as an organisation. Don't have a model that's live yet, but we're really working through developing that model.
No, thank you. That sounds great, because that whole thing about trying to prevent it is fairly critical, isn't it? Okay, thank you. So now I'm going to go to Julie.
Sorry, thank you, Chair. Sorry, I was just looking up the community bank details on the website, because that's something I wanted to mention in another question. I've got a couple of questions. I wonder if I might be able to spread them over the course of the meeting, so as not to sort of put you on the spot too much. In terms of the consultation, and I've just looked at the consultation documents and the meetings and so on, the thing that worries me is that the people who really need service aren't necessarily going to be the ones who actually engage with consultation. And I had a quick chat with Paul beforehand, and he mentioned that there is some outreach work and so on. But I'm thinking that if I was a single mum with 2 kids and I was just about to be kicked out of my flat, I wouldn't necessarily reach for my non-existent laptop to go onto the council's website. That's the only thing that worries me. Apart from everything else, I think there's some fantastic ideas in here, and it's great to see that there's a lot more, things are being done in a more joined up way. But that is the thing that worries me about actually getting the people who need the service, actually engaging. And I mean, it's more likely to be people who aren't necessarily in that situation who are going to be engaging. But anyway, I'd be really interested to hear what you're saying about that. I'm sorry, I don't mean to criticise, I'm just concerned. Thank you.
So I think that's a fair point, Councillor Cattell. I think, so having gone through, aside from this work that for the council, in my own professional life, having gone through a number of co-production events that were part of the service that I was part of delivering, it is difficult. You tend to get a certain sort of person come to co-production, and they tend to, they engage with it quite well. But you're right, getting representation is much harder than you would imagine. But I think what I was saying, as I said before, co-production as a method of producing strategies and services is an evolving art and nearly a science. And the people who are involved in producing co-production events are aware of the problems you mentioned and are working on them. And each iteration of a co-production event does get better, as they realise that, for example, they didn't get the people that they really wanted to get this time. They try new methods, and they try new incentives to engage with people, and they try new ways of engaging with people. And so co-production as an art form is getting better and better and better, and the people who are doing it are getting more skilled and more skilled and more skilled. So yes, it's not perfect at the moment, but it is better to press on with an imperfect method and improve it than to not try at all, I think, is the only answer I can give to that. And it is getting better. And, I've seen my colleagues who work in co-production become more skilled and it become more of an art. So, yeah, you're right, but it is getting better and it is invaluable even in its current form.
Very much, Paul. That's really useful, and good luck with it. I think it might be good to come back to this committee with the results of the.
Harry wanted to also have to speak about that.
Forgive me, I've just got a little bit to add, if that's okay, Chair, just on specifically what we're doing.
Yeah, no, I think Harry, that's what you're here for.
I think it's a really, really good point, and I think throughout the strategy we've been really focused on ensuring that people with lived experience shape the strategy, and it's really important that people who have experiences of our services shape the services we provide, and that's a philosophy that we've adopted throughout this entire process. So specifically during the consultation period, we've been working with the organisation I mentioned before, Common Ambition, with that lived experience group and informing the development of the strategy. We're also working with another organisation called Just Life, who are quite literally going around our temporary accommodation at the moment, knocking on people's doors, inviting them to take part in our consultation. We're really, really trying to do what we can to get those views in, but we do really also recognise that a family that's experiencing homelessness do have other priorities in responding to our consultation. But we're really trying hard to get those views in our consultation.
Can I just add in a bit to that? Is there a lot more lived experience now than there was when you were developing the policy 5 years ago? Because it sounds like there is.
No. The lived experience is, there is more lived experience because there are more people who have experienced homelessness, and they've got older, so they've got more experience, and unfortunately there are more of them. It's how that's accessed that is the key to unlocking that lived experience. Just having lived experience in and of itself doesn't mean that you're going to be able to articulate that experience in a way that can be incorporated into the strategy of the project you're opening. What you need are skilled workers, careful workers, because sharing your lived experience can be quite a traumatic experience, and often people with lived experience are exploited and have to tell the story over and over again, like performing monkeys. So what is the amount of experience has increased as you might expect, but what has really increased are the skills of the people accessing that lived experience in a careful, respectful, non-exploitative way, and that is what we're seeing an increase in happening.
That's really positive. Thank you.
And just to add on to that, thank you, Chair. Just to say that we have really involved lived experience within this process, and just to add a little bit to what Councillor Nan said, it really reflects the joined up work we do with our partners, who are so valuable in galvanising that lived experience to ensuring that people who have experienced homelessness and rough sleeping have their say within our strategy. And as Councillor Nan has outlined, it's more about how we're accessing that lived experience, which has really improved thanks to our incredible voluntary sector partners.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you. Right, now I'm going to Jo.
I always like to go after incredible voluntary sector partners. It's a good moment, isn't it? And I want to note the strong engagement that you've had
with the sector, and Steve Morton was at Community Works this week. You've been talking to the Youth Homelessness Group. I feel like that engagement has been really strong. I had a couple of questions. One, we know there's a correlation between homelessness and sexual and domestic abuse, and I wondered if we could see that link strengthened in the strategy and the disproportionate effect on women recognised. That was one point. And then the second question was just to add to the points that Adam was making about data. There's clearly a difference in young people that are experiencing homelessness as part of a family and youth homelessness. So I was interested if we have data measures that we're going to embed that kind of recognise those two quite different sources of homelessness and its impacts on young people. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. It's a really good question and a really good point. So I think, first of all, it's really important to highlight that some groups of people are more likely to experience homelessness because of their personal characteristics, and you've reflected on that already. And we are, as part of our consultation, we're talking to our Violence Against Women and Girls network about how we can strengthen the support or strengthen our work within our strategy. The data is really important in understanding that, and our review has highlighted some of those areas about specific groups of people, specifically women, who are more likely to experience homelessness because of the result of domestic violence and abuse. So we're really alert to that, really improving our data collection and really working with partners to strengthen our approach in those areas.
That's great. And what do you think about the data that's the kind of trying to tease out the difference between youth homelessness and young children and young people within families? Are we confident that we've got the right data measures in place for both those sets of young people?
Thank you. It's a really good question, and we've reflected already today about our need to improve our data around young people, and we definitely need to do more work on that. As part of our consultation, we have a workshop with partners working with young people, children and families this coming Monday, and part of the challenge there is about how we can address that very point. What are the actions that we need to be taking within our strategy? What's the data that we need to collect, and what are the things we need to measure? So really hear that, and thank you for your comments and feedback, something that we really need to focus in on. We've got an approach in doing that at the moment, but any further thoughts and feedback about how we can improve that would be really welcome as part of our consultation.
Final comment, it's as Jackie said, we've got such a huge problem in Brighton and Hove. No one agency can solve it. In fact, probably solving it is it's the real ambition, isn't it? So thinking where we can further support and also further work with our health colleagues. The recent health counts data has really clearly shown the things that, of course, you know already, and the impact on people's health of the problems that we have with housing in the city. So, yeah, thank you.
No, thank you.
Thank you. And just to add on to that final point, you're absolutely right in the health counts data and what it's highlighted. As a result of that and through this strategy, we're really trying and we're really championing what we call a strategic joint needs assessment on households living in temporary accommodation. So we really can understand what the health inequality impacts are of homelessness in that group and really understand more about people experiencing homelessness and living in temporary accommodation.
Oh, and I just can't help but come back then, and then perhaps we could surface that report at the Health and Wellbeing Board so that the leaders in the healthcare system can also hear that about the wider determinants and think how they could start leaning in strategically. I think that would be really helpful.
Yeah, no, thank you, Jo. One of the thoughts I just had from that was that I know doctors have often said to me, because I always taught young people, teenagers, they say they don't often see them in surgery, don't see young people as much as obviously older people. But women are much more likely to go in. And I know you said that was another area it was difficult to, predict what was going to happen. So I really welcome, GPs and health services being involved, because they're often some of the first people to know, particularly in the case of, a woman on her own with children and so on, who is having health problems because of it, or a lot of anxiety and so on. So I assume there's a lot of work going on with that.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Absolutely, yes. So important thing to highlight is public health are part of our strategy development group. So they're really interconnected within the work we're doing to develop the strategy. I reflected earlier in my presentation about the way that we've approached the strategy and really reflecting on that public health approach again, and really the interconnection between housing, health and care is really at the sort of the foundations of the strategy, and really thinking about if we're going to really have a chance at addressing homelessness in the city, we need to be thinking about the underlying causes. And what our data is telling us is some of the biggest factors are things like mental health, physical health, and substance misuse. So they're really integral to our approach in addressing homelessness and rough sleeping.
And if I'm sorry, Chair, may I just add that, I think it needs to be recognised that homelessness is the end point of a collapse. So often what happens is that higher up the level from homelessness, things start going wrong, and then they get amplified as you move down the levels, and then the end result is homelessness. And I think that's the view of your strategy is taking. That look at the levels above homelessness, look at the points before a person becomes homelessness, intervene then, and then you stop that collapse and descend into not having a home to live in, and ultimately even worse, rough sleeping.
So just out of interest, do GPs actually pass that information back to somewhere that, they have somebody who is obviously very distressed and looking like they're going to split up with their partner and may not have anywhere to live?
We've been working really hard to engage with GP surgeries, and our frontline homelessness services have been out to GPs to promote the work that we do, and really encourage GPs to talk about with their patients people's housing situations. We also work quite closely with social prescribers who work closely with their GPs to really link in at that point. As Councillor Nan has brilliantly put, there's a journey before homelessness, and sometimes that's around health, engaging with appointments, and how we can link in there to get that advice in at the earliest opportunity.
Thank you, Harry. Okay, now I go to Raphael.
Hiya. So I had a chance to speak with young homeless people through the Clock Tower Sanctuary, which for me was both incredibly eye-opening, but also honestly quite traumatic, actually, just to hear just the severity of the issues that people were dealing with in emergency accommodation, or indeed in, just living out of a car in some cases, or rough sleeping in certain cases. And, very much appreciated people taking the time to speak to me about that. The Clock Tower Sanctuary also has done some consultation with their own sort of group on this, so I wanted to sort of ask some questions in relation to some of the points that they've raised with me. So just to sort of start with, and actually I want to preface this also by saying I do think this report is really thorough and is well written, and I really appreciate the work that's gone into it. It's also the case that we obviously have a huge issue here, and deserves a lot of attention and quite serious questions about the poor state of some of the services in relation to this. So there's one area that they wanted us to sort of focus on around prevention, which I think you're correct. Absolutely, that's what we need to start with. So some of what they wanted us, or the council, to look at is around increased awareness in schools. So some of that relates to sort of unhealthy and abusive family dynamics, what those are and how to look out for them, because obviously there's a relationship there between abuse in the home and that. And so, obviously it's a broad thing there, but I think there's a point to be made about how, schools can play a role in sort of educating around unhealthy family dynamics, which can have a sort of an effect, a lead-on effect in terms of leading to homelessness, and in general more awareness around circumstances that lead to homelessness, particularly for LGBTQ plus people, because a lot of the time they become homeless if they're young, when they come out to family, and then they're sort of immediately homeless and unhoused. And when you're sort of immediately sort of going from what is a relatively safe life to rough sleeping, that very quick transition is in some ways more dangerous, because you don't have any experience of what this is like. You don't know how to access services or anything. obviously on that there is, Stonewall Housing doing amazing work with the council and with other councils that supports this. But I do think that there's a role that schools can play in this. I'd really recommend, both to the council and to the government, in fact, in terms of, with guidance towards trans people, being really respectful towards our identities rather than this kind of culture war, anti-gender ideology stuff that we're seeing with the government currently, because it does actually have a lead-on effect to added homelessness within the trans community, which I'm just seeing from a very personal viewpoint, I guess, as part of the community. Because a lot of the people I met at the Clock Tower Sanctuary, they're very similar to myself. It's just they've not had the financial support or the family around them. That was really tough to see personally. So I think that there's just a role that schools can play there that I think is really important to prevention. And more broadly, access to resources in schools as well, in terms of what help is available to prevent rough sleeping, having those resources, not just in schools, but also just more broadly being available. That's one of the recommendations from that working group. And then some of the worst stuff for me was just hearing about people's experiences in both temporary and emergency accommodation. Like the big ask from the group that I spoke with in person was they felt that it was a real gap in that there wasn't emergency accommodation specifically for 18 to 25-year-olds. Now there is for, I believe, for the same cohort that exists, I think, in the form of supported accommodation, if I understand correctly, but there isn't for emergency accommodation. So that was something that really stood out. And then in terms of testimony that I heard from people, I heard testimony around disabled young people who there was a bed bug outbreak, and when that happens, you essentially have to very quickly grab all of your belongings and give them to people responsible for you in the emergency accommodation. If you're somebody with a disability doing that, one woman ended up fainting as a result of this. So this was something that clearly her access needs as a disabled person weren't being taken into account in this case. So I think there's a need in terms of recognizing the duty of care for disabled young people and disabled homeless people more generally in emergency accommodation, making sure that if you're asking something of a resident, that's cognizant of the fact that that might not be physically possible for them for various reasons, not just disability. So I think there's work in terms of the amount of care that's going into supporting people there. And yeah, it was really horrible hearing the stories of things like sexual violence in emergency accommodation in the city. And again, younger people are more likely to be at risk of this because they're younger. They don't know how to handle being in in emergency or other forms of accommodation around older individuals. That puts them at higher risk ultimately. And in the document, there's reference with Oasis and the Clock Tower Sanctuary. Also, they spoke about this. I think the Oasis document, in the document, it says about half of women turning to sex work who are in sort of homeless situations, and that sort of it's also true very much in the trans community. All throughout the community, not just homeless people. There's a lot of people who engage in sex work. It's very common, probably the most common form of employment in a sense in our community locally. But particularly for people who are homeless, who just have no other way of making money, who don't have any other access to support. I think that there's a real need to drill down into how we can better support people and prevent people from being forced into sex work. So that's something that really stood out for me. And people also using apps and things like Grindr that's kind of often their only way of acquiring safe spaces is this kind of app. So it's sort of, merging on some level sex work and more casualized sofa surfing. That's something that I think is a kind of a newer development, or at least something that I was not familiar with. I'm going into a lot of different topics here.
You're going into a lot of different topics.
I hope that you can appreciate that this is all stuff that's really stuff that was eye-opening for myself, and that I hope is useful to understanding, some of the complex issues that young people are dealing with. You know, there's a lot more I could say, but I've forwarded some of these to Jill. I can always send some of the information that I've been sent also to yourself and Councillor Nan. Appreciate I've said a lot here, so it's going to be hard to respond to all of it. It was a bit quick fire. I've got some more points to make if that's okay, Chair. But if
Can you make the points like they're a question? Because you're kind of making a lot of statements.
thank you, appreciate it.
I understand that, but try and form them into more of a
Yes,
question.
thank you. Sorry, there's a lot of information I've been given. Trying to condense it down into easy, bite-sized questions is not always my best skill. Okay, so can I ask, in terms of what work are you doing with schools to support them in avoiding people becoming homeless in local schools, in terms of emergency accommodation? What can be done to improve people's safety in emergency accommodation, and also what can be done to specifically ensure that young people are getting specific provision that's appropriate to them in emergency accommodation?
Well done, thank you. Bye.
I'd just like to address a couple of things you said because they were really quite interesting, and then I'll hand over to Harry to give you more substantive answers. I think your point about schools is really interesting. I know a long time since I've been at school, but I think there's a squeamishness in talking about homelessness in schools, and I understand that. One, because there are likely to be a number of children in that particular school who are homeless, and how would they feel about their situation being used as education? But I don't think schools do enough to educate people about homelessness and their pupils about what they should do if they find themselves in a situation. Just an example, and again, it was a very long time ago when I was in school. As a teenager, I found myself homeless, and I didn't even know I was homeless. So, you know, that I'm sure the teachers are doing a better job of describing the situation now than 40 years ago. But yeah, I think you're right. I think schools can do a lot more about it. But that's for teachers to work out how they do that. I'd kind of just like to address the kind of description of the horrors that the people you spoke to described, and not to deny those horrors exist. So there's this kind of spectrum of homelessness, and at one end of it, it is horrible, it is damaging, it is traumatic, and it is life-threatening. But I'd just like to caution as well that when we're talking about homelessness, that we remember the vast majority of the residents who experience homelessness in this city are living really ordinary lives in temporary accommodation. You know, their big problems are, how will I get to work? How will I get to school? So I'd just like to kind of caution against always describing homelessness in terms of the horrors that some people are experiencing, and always try to remember that most of the homeless people in this city are living difficult, hard lives, but relatively ordinary lives. You know, they're not engaged in sex work, they're not engaged in, you know, they're not taking drugs, they maybe have mental health issues, but they're managed. That is not to deny the descriptions you've just provided. I absolutely accept that, and I know firsthand it goes on. But I just sometimes feel compelled to say we must remember that most people experiencing homelessness are living really ordinary lives in tremendously difficult circumstances, and that isn't the criticism of the stories you just raised. I just want to mention it. Thank you. I'll hand over to Amy now.
Thank you, Councillor, and thank you, Councillor, for your comments. And I really appreciate you galvanising the views of young people and sharing them here today, because a big part of this is about us listening to inform our draft strategy. So thank you for that. I'd really like just to give a recognition to Clock Tower Sanctuary for the incredible work that they do in supporting young people experiencing homelessness. I understand that they're fully self-funded and they work incredibly hard to provide outstanding services. So just to give that recognition to the Clock Tower and all of our other partners that are involved in the strategy and also involved in addressing homelessness and rough sleeping in the city. We know that we have a disproportionate number of young people living within the city. We know that a lot of those young people are living with friends and family in a sort of unsettled environment. And because of that, more likely to experience homelessness, and quite suddenly as well. To answer some of your questions as well, and just to provide a bit more context too, I think on terms of what we're seeing in that vulnerability, I think what the data is telling us is that there are an increasing number of people experiencing homelessness who are vulnerable. and then those vulnerabilities play out in our temporary accommodation, which I think is really important to highlight. And what we want to do within our strategy is that we want to increase the support for people living in temporary accommodation and also ensure that there is a good standard of accommodation when they're there. I think we really need to do more work with schools. We are part of something called a Family First partnership, which is all about how we can work with families through schools to really encourage that early intervention in homelessness. I think there's more work for us to do. I mentioned a workshop that we're holding on Monday next week, and that's including schools and other children and youth service providers about how we can engage schools and how we can engage with families through schools to identify those early signs of homelessness and hopefully intervene early on and give staff that work within schools the tools to be able to respond to that need when they see it. Then in terms of specific young person provision, I hear that feedback and I hear that comment, so thank you for sharing it. As a local authority, we already commission some services for young people. For example, Brighton Hove Foyer with supported housing for young people. We also have a family mediation service that support young people in that situation I've just described, hopefully be able to stay within that family home. So we have services that we will commission specifically for young people, but I hear that ask around further provision for young people, and I take that on board for the strategy. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Raphael. And yeah, I do agree with that education, what you said, Paul. It's very challenging to talk about homelessness when you might have children who are homeless. It has to be dealt with very sensitively. Okay, thank you. Oh, yes, please do. Please do.
Thank you, Chair. The only I did misspeak slightly when I was talking about Oasis, because that half figure I mentioned, that's simply for the people who were accessing Oasis's services, or women who are accessing their services, not for the whole homeless population. Sorry, but if it would be possible to get a response specifically in relation to sex work and kind of, the reality of what I saw. It's not every person who's experiencing, homelessness in the city, but it is clearly an issue. So I'm interested in what we can do as a council in this strategy to prevent people being forced into sex work as a result of homelessness, etc. Thanks.
Sorry, Catherine Hill, that wasn't a criticism of your question. It was simply because I sometimes feel compelled to explain the kind of banality of homelessness sometimes, aside from the horror of it. A lot of people experiencing homelessness, it's a banal horror. Do you know what I mean? It's not that sharp end of it horror, and that wasn't a criticism of you raising that issue. So.
Thank you. It's a really good question. I think there's lots of work that we do already with our partners. There's lots of safeguarding processes, multi-agency risk assessment processes that really support people in those really vulnerable situations. And I think, like I said earlier, what we're seeing is increasing number of people who are vulnerable, are experiencing homelessness, and those vulnerabilities play out within our accommodation. And it's about support that we provide those people, but it's about just identifying people who are at risk and the processes that we have in order to identify risk at that point of application, working with partners to ensure that once those risks are identified, we work in a multi-agency way to safeguard individuals. And as I've mentioned before, we're working with lots of different organisations through this consultation period, specifically going to be consulting with the Violence Against Women and Girls Network to think about more work that we can do to support people experiencing DVA, but also sex work in temporary accommodation as well.
Thank you. Sam, no, it's not your turn yet. Yeah, we allow Sam to add something.
I just wanted to say, as the lead for Vorg in the city, that we are engaging very much with this, but also we've got a group being set up specifically to look at sex work, so it will feed into that. So it was just to add some information about that.
Okay, great. Perhaps you can talk to that afterwards. I think that would be a good idea. Okay. Thank you, Raphael. Is that everything?
There's other recommendations that were given to me by group.
Okay. Those, I think, probably pass them on. I think that would be really good.
Sorry, there are other recommendations made by group members who are part of the Clock Tower Sanctuary. It's quite thorough. As you can imagine, it's a large group of homeless young people. They're going to have a lot of opinions about things. It's hard to make all of this into coherent questions sometimes. But there's more that I'd like to discuss. Would it be appropriate for me to do so out of the meeting with other partners? Then is that your recommendation?
I think that'd be a really good idea. Actually.
Okay, so it's time's up.
Well, it's kind of, because otherwise it's sort of, because we've still got other people who are going to be speaking. Okay, so what I'm going to do now, is I am going to Anna 3, and then I'm going to Anne, and then I'm going to TJ, and then Sam, and then Julie. Okay, so I will now go to Anna 3.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much for the thorough report. I was going to say, given that there's a potential 45% reduction in the homelessness from the homelessness prevention grant, I mean, do you have any contingency plans to replace the lost 4.9 million? I mean, do you have a sense of, specific services or targets or commitments, in the draft strategy that you'll have to deprioritise? Thank you.
Thank you. It's a really good question, and it is a real concern for the city about that loss of funding. And that funding is there to support the services that help people out of homelessness, prevent homelessness from occurring. So it is a real challenge for us as an authority and as a sector. We're not quite yet sure what the final announcement will be on that funding. We're waiting to hear further within this calendar year about what the final change to what we call the homelessness prevention grant allocation is. We understand there might be something called transitional arrangements in place where that reduction is carried out over a number of years, but it's going to have a real impact on our ability to prevent homelessness. Our thinking at it is about how we use our existing resources to be able to meet that gap. So, for example, we're spending, and we've reflected already today, spending quite a significant amount of money on temporary accommodation, and it's about how can that funding be directed to organisations that provide greater social value to ensure that services commissioned by our voluntary sector partners, for example, are able to sustain themselves through additional revenue streams as a result of a potential loss in grant funding. So we're trying to think really innovatively and creatively about how we meet that gap, but it is a real pressure on us as a city and as a system, and about how we address homelessness and loss sleeping.
And it's really, of course.
Thank you. No, I really appreciate the answer and the difficulty we find ourselves in as a city. And I wondered if you'd considered, or have you had these discussions with partners about what might be the contingency? Have those conversations progressed? Because once it happens, I don't know what that transitional period will be, and it'll be good to have some ideas what that might look like.
Thank you. Really good question. And I think it's a really good opportunity just to promote the financial contribution that our VCSE partners provide the city. I think it's 10 million, I think was the last research that was carried out. So it's a significant contribution that the sector provides to addressing homelessness and loss sleeping in the city. And again, a shout out to all of our partners. We have articulated the risk around the loss of funding to our partners, and what our initial thinking is about how we might mitigate that. As soon as we've got further understanding about what our grant allocation will be, we'll engage with our partners further to discuss what that might look like in real time.
Yeah, thank you, Anna 3. Anne.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the report. As everyone said, it's a very thorough report, so well done on that. Just looking at 4.2 about the National Homelessness Strategy, would we be informed if there are any changes proposed that would be put into the draft strategy? I mean, it'd be useful if we were kept up to date with what the changes might be and what that might mean for our strategy. Is my first part. Looking on 6.4, I think it is, new initiatives such as No First Night Out model. Would require decommissioning existing services or reallocating funds as no new grant funding is expected. I'd have been interested to know a little more about what that is. I know about the No Second Night Out, understand that thoroughly. The No First Night Out model, I've been really interested in knowing a little more about that. I'm going to get a little political. I think as a council, we have a lot of power and authority in the city, and there are a lot of larger landlords, who have student accommodation, different blocks in the city. They might have a block at Malscoon, they might have another block in Hove or whatever. I wondered if it's, the council could be talking with those landlords to move all the students into one block, because there's no way they should be meant to share with our homeless population, but then, use temporary accommodation monies to use the second block as temporary accommodation. Because I noticed on page 136, our homeless population at the moment is predominantly males, single males, 30 to 50-year-old. And I thought, well, if we're looking for those that we're assessing and we need it, say, for up to 1 year, it's worth talking to landlords. There's a lot of empty student accommodation in the city, and if they can condense their students into one block and we could rent or work with them on another block, that might help our temporary accommodation costs. The other thing is landlords. I noticed again that 1 in 3 households are in private rented accommodation. Now, there is a lot coming through that will be penalising landlords, and that includes those within the city. They'll be expected to pay extra taxes, EPCs to reach a level C, which, to be honest, most homeowners don't reach that, let alone rented accommodation. Councils certainly don't. They'll have to pay for registers to be, on a register. I think, this constant attacking of landlords could mean that we have a higher level of homelessness if a lot of landlords pull out of the city. So I wondered what the cost would be then, financially and in staff resources, particularly dealing with a higher number of possible homelessness issues. So I just want you to have those thoughts in your mind when we're looking at this as well, because one might be an idea for future temporary accommodation, but one I'm concerned could impact on the strategy in terms of numbers. Thank you.
So you mentioned a couple of points there. I think I'll address kind of the general points you made, and I'll hand, as usual, over to Harry to give you a more detailed answer. I think in terms of adapting student accommodation to temporary accommodation, I suppose in theory that's possible, but it's unlikely because those I think you're talking about purpose-built student accommodation, is that right? I think those purpose-built student accommodations are a source of income for those private providers, and I think they'd be reluctant to give up that income to help us out of our problem. However, Councillor Taylor and Councillor Williams are looking at bringing private properties into our portfolio that can be used as temporary accommodation. It probably will never be anything on the scale of a purpose-built student block, but they are making purposeful strides towards increasing the amount of accommodation that we use and that we take in from the private sector. Also, those buildings are really quite big. And if you were to put, I think the biggest hostel in the country is probably only about 150, 200 beds. And that's a very specific one in Camden. I think to create a 300-bed temporary accommodation would provide challenges in and of itself to manage and to keep safe and to keep up and to use. So I don't think that would, while it is perfectly possible, I don't think you would find a private company willing to give up their building to do that. And I think it would present challenges of its own and possibly expense of its own. I think the second thing you mentioned about holding landlords to higher standards and will that increase homelessness in the city? Will it? I don't know. It is expecting landlords to provide good quality accommodation can increase homelessness. Will they withdraw? it's impossible to say. I don't think there's anything intrinsically wrong with asking landlords to improve the accommodation that they provide to their residents. I don't think anything that's being asked of both local government and ourselves is particularly onerous. And I think a good landlord who runs their business, because it is a business well, should be able to soak those costs up and provide the accommodation of a good standard. I mean, that's all very hypothetical, and it remains to be seen what impact that will have. But I don't believe increasing standards will reduce the amount of accommodation available. And I'll hand over to Harry.
Thank you, Councillor, and thank you, Councillor, for your question. So I'll just address as much of that as I can. So in terms of the National Homelessness Strategy, like I reflected earlier, we're hoping that the announcement will be made December. More than happy to keep the committee informed about that strategy and share our thinking about what that strategy means specifically for our draft strategy that we're consulting on at the moment. Just talking about touching a little bit on No First Night Out. So this is about how we can better focus on people who are at risk of rough sleeping. A lot of our focus is about how we support people already experiencing rough sleeping, so people quite literally sleeping on the streets. How can we move to a space where we're able to identify those that are the greatest risk of rough sleeping, so that we can really quickly target those intervention support before they then have that first night out. So it's really trying to move towards that early intervention space. We've got to think about the resources that we have and how we direct it towards that really early intervention prevention space. In terms of supply of temporary accommodation, Councillor Mann has already talked about it. Just again to reflect that this financial year we're forecasting the provision of 60 new council-owned temporary accommodation homes, and really increasing our supply of temporary accommodation across the city. And looking at every opportunity that we have, and really being mindful about the impact that some larger scale temporary accommodation units, as Councillor Mann has reflected on, can have on our communities and our neighbourhoods. We're really paying close attention to the pressures on landlords with the upcoming Renters' Rights Bill, and we're following that journey through Parliament and Lords and looking at what that final iteration of the bill is going to be. You're right in saying the proportion of private rented homes within the city is very significant. I think it's about 33 or 36% of our homes are private rented homes. It's one of the biggest pressures that we have in homelessness in the city. We still have a large number of people experiencing homelessness as a result of loss of private rented tenancy, and that's reflected within our data. But it's also one of the biggest solutions that we have to resolving homelessness in the city. We let through landlords around 250 to 300 rented homes each year to homeless households. So it's really in our interest to make sure that we're supporting landlords locally to sustain in the market and to work with us. One example that we've got about how we're supporting landlords is something called our Energy Performance Certificate initiative, and effectively what we're doing is we're looking at how we can invest in support landlords in improving their energy efficiency standards of their property through grant funding, in return of them letting that property to a homeless household or allowing us to lease it from them on a longer term basis. So really trying to support landlords remain in the sector, being really alert to the changes that are happening and how that might impact the city.
Yeah.
Sorry, may I request a quick 2-minute comfort break?
Yes, yes,
very
no,
much.
that's fine. Would everybody like to have a quick break? Yeah, of course you can, Anne. You're kind of midway. We wouldn't normally do that, but obviously it's an emergency.
Chair, for that, and for letting me do that. I'd just like to say, sorry, Councillor Meadows, we've literally just heard that in line with what you were saying about buying temporary accommodation, I think today we've just invested £10 million in 200 council owned temporary accommodation. So, and I didn't pop off to find that out. I genuinely did have to go to the toilet. It was just a coincidence I found it out.
Thank you, Councillor Nan. Yes, I did read that, and it is good news. Now, I just want to go back because I wasn't talking about the huge university student accommodation. I'm talking about the insurance companies that have smaller blocks for around 20 to 30 students, and they're usually Lewis Road, London Road, all the best spots where people think we should be building council properties. And I just think there are opportunities because we are getting fewer and fewer international students coming into the city. And it's our homegrown students that tend to like the HMOs because they prefer the atmosphere in a house situation. But I think there are opportunities if we go out and explore, and the council has the power to do that. And I think they should be using it. So that's my first point. And then going back onto the landlord situation, I'm not talking about larger landlords. There are hundreds and hundreds of what we call accidental landlords, where the parents have left a property to a son or daughter and they rent it out because they can't bear to get rid of the family home. And the council do, as Harry knows, pick up a lot of those. And we've had some issues around insurance problems for those properties. But I just think, you know, there may be an impact if too much onus is put onto the landlord. These accidental landlords particularly may find it's not worth a hassle. So that's the point I wanted to make on that.
Yeah, just to say that I apologise for kind of imagining something you weren't talking about in you know, renting out those huge private blocks. But yeah, you're right. I mean, if you know of accommodation that you think might be usefully used as temporary accommodation, do let Councillor Williams and Jake and Councillor Taylor know, because they are exploring all options. As you can see today, by spending £10 million to bring 200 more council and temporary accommodations online, they're up for that sort of thing. So please do let them know. In terms of the landlords being priced out of the market by regulation, again, it doesn't have to be like that. You know, we don't. I think Harry mentioned a number of schemes where we can support landlords who need to make improvements to their properties. Is that right? Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. And I think we're really, as I mentioned before, we're really monitoring the impact that the change of legislation and increasing regulation might have on our landlords, and making sure that we're doing what we can to support landlords. I think we're here today to listen to the committee's views and feedback on the strategy, and really taking on board the point around landlords and the support for landlords as a really important part about how we address homelessness and rest living in the city.
It was a person sitting here who did exactly that. And it was international student accommodation got turned into a homeless hostel, which has worked very well. Right, okay, so it is being done. I'm now going to go to TJ.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, thank you for the report. Very nice read. A lovely bit of cheerful late night reading I found. There's a couple of things I was wondering if you could help out, just help clear up for me, because most of what you put in there are really good and it's a really good direction. I'm looking forward to seeing us moving. But I was wondering, so for one of the things that really caught my eye is we received 2,300 applications in 2024. Yeah, I think the report said only about 620 of them we actually had a duty of care for in relation to homelessness. And I was just wondering if you could speak about why, if we're getting so many applications, that number kind of varies so much. And also, I was also about to touch on landlords, but from a fairly different perspective, because in my dealings with people from homelessness and people at risk of it, it's because of landlords who are renting out homes which to describe as substandard would be generous, putting rent up and up and up and put at a rate that well outstrips someone's wages. So when you speak about intervention in the report, does that include going to the landlord and go, hang on, you're being unreasonable here with your with this property in various states of disrepair? Why are you charging this much for something that is not up to a good enough standard that we wouldn't house someone in if they were going into temporary accommodation?
Thank you, Councillor. I'm grateful for your question. So, just to explain a little bit about the figures within in the report. So, the 2,300 applications reflects the number of people, the number of households who've asked for help from the council with homelessness. That 620 subscriber duty of care, without getting too technical, is what we call where the local authority accepted a full housing duty. And at risk of explaining statutory processes, effectively what happens is when someone first is at risk of homelessness, we try and work with them to prevent that homelessness from occurring. If we're unable to achieve that, we try to relieve that homelessness. And if we're unable to relieve that homelessness, we say, right, we're going to work with you on an ongoing basis to resolve your homelessness. So what you'll see is that the numbers change as people go through that journey. So we're there to prevent that homelessness, relieve it, and then we work with them to resolve that homelessness on an ongoing basis. Then in terms of the point around landlords, so a big part of the prevention work that we do is about negotiating with landlords, not only about the rent set for somebody's tenancy, but also any other works or conditions with the property that the landlord could do. And we really try to work and incentivise landlords to do that, to make sure that someone's home is suitable to continue to live in and at an affordable rate as well. Sorry, at an affordable rate as well.
Thank you, Harry. Do you want to come back on that, TJ?
Yeah, just quickly, I'm quite glad to hear us negotiating with landlords because I remember from my time of working with Councillor Williams on the private rented sector is, whilst there are some good landlords out there doing the job quite well, there are some who are going above and beyond to get as much money out of their tenants as they can and do as little for them as they can. And the vast majority I wouldn't be surprised if they even know where their properties are, seeing they just leave it to an agency to do all the heavy lifting for them and they just sit there and collect a cheque at the end of the month. So hearing us actually negotiating and working and pushing landlords to try and keep people in housing is something I found really encouraging, and something that you kind of touched on, so jogged my memory as well whilst you were saying that, was when you were talking earlier about compound needs and working with people, is when someone with these complex needs are put into the community, that can sometimes lead to a lot of community tension where the individual themselves doesn't have necessarily the support in place to keep them within housing, end up slipping back into the system, whilst causing community tensions to rise as well. So are we making sure that when we are housing these people, we're putting them somewhere where they are going to thrive and not kind of just setting them up to fail?
I think that's an interesting point, TJ, and I think, why is there an obligation on people who are experiencing homelessness to be better neighbours than you or I? And I think the vast majority of bad neighbours are not people who are formerly experiencing homelessness. And I think, as I said to Councillor Hill, we need to stop focusing on the edge of the problem and recognise that most people who are experiencing homelessness are in temporary accommodation. When placed into accommodation, won't be a problem for their neighbours. And I'm not, again, like, in the same way as I wasn't criticising Councillor Hill, I'm not criticising you for raising that point. But I always like to drag it back to the middle. I always like to drag it back to, the fact that when we put people in accommodation out of temporary accommodation, they're not going to be a problem because they're just people like you or me. And I get that sometimes a placement will be made and that person will cause a disruption to the community, but that happens everywhere with every type of person. And like I say, not a criticism of you, but I don't think we should always be focusing on the problems that come with people who have previously experienced homelessness. And I'd just like to make that point in the same way as I made that point with Councillor Hill. So. But I'll let Harry answer your question properly. So.
Thank you, and I think Councillor Land has described it very well, and we're always very mindful about the location and about ensuring that we've got sustainable communities. So we do take that into account when we think about temporary accommodation and also things like supported housing and the allocation of social housing as well.
Apology, I wanted to clarify. I'm quite thankful that myth has been dispelled here, because it obviously is a myth, and I've probably worked with people who have recently experienced homelessness without ever realising it, because it's, as you spoke with Councillor Hill, it is such a normal, not a normal thing, but such a prevalent issue, that thing that people go through. But I was more speaking about those with complex needs, where obviously I'm not trying to blame them for having those complex needs, and I was just making sure that, especially when it comes to housing selection, we aren't putting people into places, like I said, setting them up to fail, and that we are we are just making sure that when we are putting people in, that we are doing it with an aim for them to not be entering the system, and not just kind of, we've got nothing, almost like a panic, that'll have to do for now, and set them up to fail to come back in 6 months' time.
Thank you. And again, the purpose of us here today is really hear the committee's views and get the feedback as part of our consultation process. So thank you, Councillor, for sharing those thoughts. And I think you're absolutely right. It's a really important point. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. I now go to Sam Harrop.
I have some observations. So some of the questions have already been answered, but I'd just still like to make my kind of comments, if you like. Obviously, here in Brighton Hove, we are very, very heavily reliant as a city on our VCS sector, and that is a huge strength in the city. And I've worked very closely with some of the, different groups, and they're amazing and they do amazing work. However, it is also quite a strategic, potentially quite a strategic weakness for us as a city council, and not just in terms of funding and grants, but also in terms of potential for scrutiny and oversight. So I just wondered, if we're thinking about how we do that a little bit more, in a more cohesive way, that we are actually really, on top of that scrutiny and that oversight of all the people that are involved in this work, because it makes it more complex because of the matrix kind of idea of and the kind of all the different groups that are involved. So that was really a comment following on from what some other comments that have been made. The idea of an early intervention strategy obviously is excellent, it's amazing, but we are talking about schools and healthcare providers that are already under huge pressure and huge stress. And so I just really want to make the comment that we're also asking additional skills and resources for them if they're being asked to support that kind of early intervention strategy. I'd also like to bring up the fact that Sussex Partnership Foundation Trust, the SPFT at the moment, is not performing particularly well, and they would be a key part of that early intervention strategy. So that would leave me with some concern. I'd like to just raise, I think it was Councillor Hill who raised the impact of women, particularly, maybe it was Ellen, sorry. And just to raise the issue, which I don't think it was specifically referenced, I may have missed it, was a long report, and I did read it quite late last night, apologies, about women, particularly with economic abuse and survivors of economic abuse, which can, of course, look very different. They can be left with a lot of problems in terms of accessing housing and other support services going forward if they are struggling with their credit records or debt or some of the other things that they're left with. So, just to raise that as a question. And the final point I'd like to raise is around sixth form colleges, because although we have got an early intervention strategy and we've talked a lot about, young people, our sixth form provision in the city, which is excellent as an education provider, we've got Basvic, Varndine, City Met, etc., and various other providers. One of the issues around that is that actually young people come and go out of that in a much more fluid way. They aren't as looked after as they might have been in a school setting. So actually they are increasingly, I would suggest, in that age group at risk. And I just wonder if there's anything specific that we were looking at for that 16 to 18/19 group who are potentially at risk because they don't have the support maybe that they might get at somewhere like Basvic or Varndine or City Met, because of the fact that it is a much more, and they're trying to encourage, rightly so, a kind of more, university type experience for young people, which is when they can fall through the gaps.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the comments. And again, I'd really appreciate sharing thoughts and feedback on the strategy, and to really help us shape our final strategy. In terms of the voluntary or VCE, and that sort of partnership governance per se, the final strategy will include a structure for delivering the strategy, and that will involve partners and what that partnership structure will look like and what the governance around it is. Just to touch briefly, really recognise the pressures on some of our statutory services and the thresholds that they're working to, and a big part of what we do is about what we need to do is how we work with them in order to unlock that capacity so that they can work in a more prevention based way. But it's a point very well made. And then in terms of the sixth form, I think, again, another really good point. We're focusing a lot on schools, but that will also need to focus on colleges. And our workshop next week, we're thinking about how we can support 16 to 18-year-olds who are sort of on the cusp of accessing adult services and how we can intervene early to prevent homelessness, for example, from the family home.
Just wanted to say, particularly in that 16 to 18-year-old group, that's often when family relations can break down and you find young people being kicked out and put onto the street. Obviously, it's a huge issue within the LGBTQ plus community. You know, young people coming out at that point, and you know, relationships can often be very strained. With no disrespect, having just gone through it, 16 to 18-year-olds are not always the easiest little group of people to you know, navigate. It can be quite tricky, even in the, you know, in the most stable of families. You know, and it is just, I'm very, very aware that particularly at places like Baswick and Varndine, there can be a real fall through there because they don't have the same relationship with schools, with heads of year, with tutors, etc. That, you know, that might be more aware of what might be going on for them.
Yeah, I can add into that, having taught teenagers for such a long time, that actually often it's family breakdown that leads, because having teenagers is very challenging for, you know, people in long-term relationships. And it often causes family breakdown. And so you can end up with young people becoming homeless because of that. So it's kind of wide range of things at that age. It's a difficult age. It's a very difficult age. So you're probably aware of that, aren't you? I'm sure you are. Okay. So now we go to Julie, who wanted to ask another question.
Thank you very much, Claire. I just wanted to sort of say something that overlaps with what Raphael was saying about young people. I'd just like to sort of put a word in for care leavers who have additional complex needs on top of everything else, and hope that we are definitely looking at something for care leavers, which is great. Now, going back to acquiring properties, do we still do head lease schemes from landlords?
Thank you for your questions. Councillor Ryan's going to touch on the question around care leavers, but I'll just quickly talk about leases. Yes, we operate a very successful leasing scheme. So we have around 550 leased temporary accommodation homes that we use for homeless households.
Yeah, and to speak to care leavers, I think it's a really interesting point. Having worked in the sector for God knows how long now, I was doing some research for coming here, and I was shocked that more isn't made of care, of being a care leaver or having experienced care being a predictive risk factor for being experiencing homelessness. You know, you're 14 times more likely to experience homelessness if you're a care leaver or someone who's experienced care. So I'm really glad that this strategy is focusing on in you know, along with families and along with young people, will look at that group, because I think that's a statistic. I knew being a care leaver or experiencing care was slightly predictive of whether you might encounter homelessness or experience homelessness, but I didn't realise it was that high. So I think that's why that section in this strategy on families, children, and those groups is incredibly important, because, you know, we've got to help those people. Those people are much more at risk of experiencing homelessness, and keep them away from it.
Yeah.
Thank you. Actually, that's interesting because I sit on the fostering panel, and there are some care leavers who actually choose to stay on with their foster family, but in a different sort of format. So they might be like a lodger or something, which I think is lovely because we've got some fantastic foster carers, and so that's good to hear because we've also defined care leavers as special characteristics, haven't we, as well? So I'm really, really pleased to hear all that. Going back to the head lease thing, I'm glad to hear that. And of course, one of the things that has been said earlier is about the possibility that a lot of landlords are offloading their properties now because of, all sorts of reasons. And I was wondering if we could maybe, I don't know, put the word about by letting agents or something that we could still allow them to keep their investment in the property if they would be willing to sort of take on a cheaper rent for say 2 years, so that we can get a family settled. I've just seen Jill sort of say, "We're doing that already." Are we doing that already?
Thank you for the question. Yes, we've recently, within the last 12 months or so, promoted our leasing scheme to private landlords. And you're absolutely right. There is an opportunity for us to work with landlords to lease their property on a longer term basis so that they can keep that asset and then make a decision in the future about what they want to do with it. And we're quite successful in that. And as we talked about the investment that we've put in purchasing temporary accommodation, we'll look at acquisitions and we'll also look at leasing and every opportunity we have to address the homelessness crisis in the city.
One final question, if I may, Chair, on finance. Obviously, reading one of the things I read in the report, it wasn't the actual main body of the report, but one of the appendices, about people not being able to afford a taxi to take their few belongings to somewhere, which was heartbreaking because that, and also going somewhere where you might not have anything other than, well, you might not even have a kettle. And that's made me think about the community bank, the Wave, it's called Wave Community Bank now, isn't it? Because it used to be called the East Sussex Credit Union. And I remember joining it when I was a councillor before because we had a presentation on it. And I think, I think I pay something like £10 a month or whatever. But I was just thinking, could we try to encourage people to sort of look at that? Is that something that we do? And also, I was just thinking that it might be a good time to encourage staff to open an account because you don't have to pay much in. And the amount of, the good it does is fantastic. So just like to put those two things out there. And then just to say, I love the idea of peer advocacy. I think that's something that maybe Raphael was talking about as well. Plus, can we give people a place to use as an address? So that they can, have things sent to them, or that they can get a bank account, or they can do all sorts of things. Sorry, that was 3 cheeky questions.
Julie, you're not cheeky, surely.
I think there are a number of organisations that will let people experiencing homelessness use their premises as an address. I mean, I know the organisation that I work for does, and that's in Worthing, and I'm sure there are equivalent services available here. Just in terms of peer advocacy, if you're talking, it's interesting and it's important, but many times the people who are acting as peer advocates are people who have recovered from homelessness, and I use that word advisedly. And while it's great to have a person who understands what you might be going through advocate for you. I think the other side of that has to be recognised as well, that that's putting an enormous pressure on that person who has gone through the experience of being homelessness, which sometimes can be horrific, and it might put their recovery at risk. So I think it's a great service, but it needs to be very carefully managed. That sort of peer advocacy, peer support services. They do great work, but they also make great demands of the people doing that work.
Great.
Sorry, Harry's got.
Just to support what Councillor Leonard said, so yes, there are provisions within the city that allow for people to use as an address, and we do work with community banks as part of our welfare advice to people about how they can maximise their income, increase their affordability, renting privately, etc.
Thank you, Harry. Well, we've come to the end of the questions. I just want to make a couple of comments at the end. I'm delighted that there is a focus on children in care, because I sat on the adoption panel and the foster panel, and I'm really pleased that there is now so much focus on this. But I was going to say that we also had the transitions policy come to this committee, and in that as well, there is quite an emphasis on children in care. So it's, the transition from being a young person to being an adult. And the category that has some of the longer term difficulties are children in care. And they often don't appear until the situation is fairly catastrophic. So I just thought I'd put that in. So obviously at the council, we're working on this issue in different areas, which is great. And the other thing I wanted to say was I'm very much hoping that the government, at the same time as coming out with their homelessness strategy, which obviously we'll take some points from, I really want them to come out with a strategy about short-term holiday lets, which we just did a report on, because it seems to me there's a lot of relationship between those two things, and I would love to see fewer, and we need them, we're a tourist city, but fewer, because obviously they're removing longer term lets for families and other people. So that's something that has been mentioned this evening, but it's actually quite an important issue, because we have lost a lot of what would be longer term rental properties. So those are my closing words, and we're finishing. There we are.
Sorry to
Before
interrupt you, Sarah, but Sarah from the Other People's Council has got a hand up online.
Oh, sorry, I didn't. Sarah, completely. Sarah, please do ask a question. I thought we'd finished, but there we go.
Sorry.
Giles spotted you. He spotted you.
I did put it up late, but it seems a really good report, and we welcome obviously that report and emphasising the issues with children and families. But just can I ask that an eye is kept on homelessness amongst older people, because our understanding is that there are increasing numbers of older people using private rented accommodation, and we can already see that there are correlations with homelessness with health and disability issues, which cross over, of course, with older people who do then there's quite a sort of discrimination in being able to get private rented accommodation. So I understand that the strategy is focusing on children and families, but can we also request that an eye is kept on older people and homelessness, particularly as the population of Brighton and Hove is ageing quite fast, and people coming up for retirement ages.
Thank you. Thank you for your question, and you're absolutely right. We do need to keep an eye on older people. Older people are unrepresented in our data, in accessing help with housing and homelessness, possibly more likely to be in a settled home, but something that we need to be really alert to. We have reached out with the Older People's Council, through Community Works and other VCSE partners. There might be something about getting in touch directly to talk a little bit about the council views and about how we can support older people and keep an eye on older people as we go through the strategy.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Yes. Good question. Sam, yes.
I just wanted to say, sorry, which I realised I hadn't said in my monologue, that this is an excellent report. Thank you very much. And I really appreciate the fact that there are some really clear deliverables and key points that we can actually track or as a council, not just as a scrutiny committee. And compared to some other documents I've seen, this is really excellent. And I think it should be held up as a a kind of way forward, because I do think it's really excellent. I really appreciate you coming to us now at this point rather than at a point where we can't really have much input. So I just wanted to show my appreciation for it. Thank you.
Thank you. Comments really well received, and I'm going to put Steve on the spot a little bit. A huge credit to Steve and the work he's done.
Well done, Steve. Thank you very much. And I agree. I thought it was a really, really good report. When I read through it, there was so much in it, and it's been so carefully thought out. And we can track it, you're right, and I'm glad it did. And I hope you go away from this feeling that we have asked you lots of good questions and scrutinised it properly, and that, gives you a little bit of food for thought as well. So thank you very much. I think we're all grateful for that. And so we will go to the recommendation is that members note the report. Noted. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Jeff.
Get out of jail free card now. Can go. Thank you. It's going to 2 hours. Isn't it? Very, very good. Really trying to show how many people they try to reach in sort of doing this week.
Yeah, it's nice to see what you really get, isn't it?
Yeah, no. Yeah,
yeah. Sometimes it's like, you actually.
Yeah,
It's like that should be surgery survey, where it's like, did you went through the motion, didn't do it properly, and that's why you got 50.
Oh, yeah.
50 responses.
Yeah.
If you do it properly,
it's really thorough. Right. Our next item is a report on the housing hate incidents policy, and we are joined by Councillor Jill Williams, Cabinet Member for Housing and New Homes. And we say hello again to Harry. So, hello, Harry.
Yeah, Harry's working hard today. Thank you very much, Chair. Just before I introduce this, just something that was raised by Councillor McClay about the Homeless Bill of Rights earlier. It just reminded me about that happy day for me, because I actually drafted and proposed that motion. And we drove it through and carried, and it has been adopted. And as far as I know, it's still with us. So thank you for reminding us about that. It was a happy day. So, yeah, it's great. So thank you. But yes, it's definitely still with us. I won't let it go anywhere, of course. Our housing hate incident policy couldn't come at a more appropriate time, actually, given the incidences, the horrific incidences lately in various communities. So for me to introduce it, I want you to really tell you about it a little bit, and then I'm going to hand over to my officers to answer questions, because I've actually got to go to a meeting about it in Whitehall, which I'm a bit late for. So this is presented today, and this has been developed in response to serious and lasting impact that hate incidents can have on individuals and families and communities, and we've been sorely reminded of that recently. It reaffirms the Council's commitment to ensuring all residents feel safe. This is important for us and for those residents to feel safe, to feel respected and supported in their homes and neighbourhoods. And this policy applies to all council tenants. So this is directly relating to our duties as a social landlord. And it's anyone as well visiting their homes, so anyone within the vicinity of their homes as well, because that ensures protection from hate incidents and discrimination. The policy provides a consistent and robust framework for intervention and ensuring affected residents receive the appropriate support. And it is important to receive the appropriate support because it's difficult sometimes for people to even report it. And we recognise that. And we want to help, make sure those incidents are addressed swiftly and effectively. It strengthens the council's partnership approach, working closely with other agencies and community organisations to promote community cohesion and prevent harm. And the policy was developed following consultation with residents, stakeholders, and the community partners involved, and ensuring their views and their experiences inform the approach, which is really important. And it also supports the council's compliance with the Social Housing Regulation Act and meets the expectations of the regulator of social housing, particularly regarding tenant safety, equality and transparency. By chance as well, it seems to have come at a good time because the National Hate Crime Awareness Week begins next week. Is that right? The date is next week. So it's actually a really good time that we're bringing this forward to you today, and in conjunction with the National Hate Crime Awareness Week, which begins next week. And given the recent tragic events in Manchester and in our very near neighbour, Peacehaven, which is incredibly sad for folks there, this couldn't have come at a more appropriate time, because the main aim of this is to empower communities to stand against hate and foster inclusion. And I'm sure you all will join me in putting our best efforts to achieve this. And I cannot think of a better time why this is so important for us as a city and for our residents and for us. So thank you for listening to the introduction. I'll now hand over to Harry to give you more detail.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Jack. Colleague is Justine, who I'll allow to introduce herself when she steps up to join me. And then if it's okay, we'll get started.
Okay, fantastic. Hello, Justine. How are you?
Yeah. Oh, hello. My name's Justine Harris. I'm head of tenancy services, so that's our landlord service for the council.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Committee. So just to take you through the report via a presentation that we're sharing on the screen here. So just to highlight the recommendations of the report, so Committee are being asked to review and comment on the draft policy ahead of adoption by the Council's Housing Services, and to note the consultation report outlined in Appendix 2 and the changes that we've made as a result of that consultation. As Councillor Williams has already highlighted, it aligns to the requirements of the Social Housing Regulation Act, and specifically other key policies and strategies within the Council, such as our anti-racism strategy, our housing strategy and our Council plan, importantly about creating a fair and inclusive city with homes for everyone. Next slide, please, Luke. Just to touch on some of the key strategic actions within the policy and the areas that we're really focusing in on the implementation of the policy. First part is around enhanced data collection, so we can really understand hate in our communities, the types of hate, where hate incidents are occurring, making sure that we've got senior oversight of hate incident cases to make sure that we're supporting victims of hate incidents in the right way, and we're concluding cases and resolving cases, ensuring that we've got good training in place for staff to implement the policy, to really understand hate, the harm that it can have on our communities, and the support to deliver the policy, to improve reporting of hate incidents, and that's something that was really reflected on our consultation response about really ensuring or really supporting tenants and residents to report incidents of hate. And a big part of us as a learning organisation is doing the implementation review as well to make sure that that's focused. After a year of having the policy in place, the key things that we'll be measuring are around satisfaction of tenants in relation to hate incidents and how they're being resolved, the volume of complaints, outcomes, successes around training, any trends around hate incidents, and rates of reporting within our communities. Next slide, please, Luke. So just talk a little bit about the scope of the policy, as Councillor Williams has already outlined this evening. So the policy outlines how the City Council's housing service will address hate incidents affecting residents, including those in our senior housing schemes, our seaside homes, and also temporary accommodation. The policy applies to victims and witnesses living in or visiting in council managed properties, victims and witnesses affected by behaviour of residents or visitors to council managed properties, and also perpetrators, whether residents or visitors or external individual whose behaviour impacts housing management. So, for example, if there is a nearby neighbour who's having an impact on a council tenant, the policy would apply to that nearby neighbour. Next slide, please, Luke. A big part of developing the policy is our consultation period, and we ran an 11-week consultation via our Your Voice platform as a council. We contacted 4,434 tenants via email. We sent out 1,196 texts. We promoted the policy in our tenant newsletter, Homing In, posted up 100 posters, promoted it on social media. We also engaged with over 100 different community groups and organisations and invited them to take part, with lots of different activities to promote the consultation. But we received 47 responses to the consultation, 57 responses to the consultation, and 9 responses came from a supplementary community organisation. Thank you. Next slide, please, Luke. And really just thinking about some of the learning and the themes that came out from that consultation. So the key themes are outlined on the slide here. So really being clearer on terminology within our policy. So, for example, what do we mean by a hate incident? Needing to be clearer about the support for victims and how we communicate with victims through hate incidents and the work that we do around hate. Making it easier to report hate incidents, and we're all aware of underreporting of hate incidents and hate crime in our communities but across the country. Being clear on the roles and responsibilities of staff implementing the policy to support that point around transparency, and also the monitoring and evaluation that we have within our policy. There's a lot that we learned from the consultation exercise. We're really grateful for those who responded to our consultation. We carried out a lot of activity, but we received 57 responses, as outlined before. And there is some learning that we've had around that consultation process, which we wanted to share with the committee. And that is around being really proactive in presence around the consultation period, really reaching out to existing community events, not necessarily arranging events, but reaching out to community events to make sure that we're engaging in those spaces on the policy. Using community resources, using sort of our residents associations, our tenant reps to help promote our consultation and the work we're doing, making sure that we're tailoring the messages to the communities that we're trying to reach, and also being transparent in our consultation approach. So, for example, sharing updates to community groups. For example, the number of responses that we've received so far, what people have said so far during their consultation, so people can really engage with our consultation process. Next slide, please, Luke. And again, just looking at the policy in itself within what we call the council's wider learning organisation, and just some of the approach that we've taken. We've really tried, like with our homelessness and rough sleeping strategy, really taken a collaborative approach to developing the strategy involving as many different individuals and communities as possible. The policy is about how we are becoming a great landlord as a housing service provider, and really recognising that the support that we provide to our tenants, it's not just about the property, it's about the people within them, and the more support that we can provide to our tenants will enable us to become a greater landlord. We've really encouraged and welcomed feedback and challenging to our decision making around the policy. So here today, the purpose of coming to committee today is to get your views on our draft policy and to really have your say in what we've included within it. And all of that approach will continue to help shape the policy as we implement it and develop further policies. We've done a lot to promote the consultation and using a lot of data to help shape the insights and the actions within the policy. And there's some other learnings that we've reflected within the presentation. I think, Luke, that's the end of the presentation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Harry. I'm now going to go to questions. Right. Sam, Ellen, and Sue. Okay. Pardon? And then Anna Sue. Yes, I can call them there. Okay, Sam.
I wanted to just raise, we talked about neighbourhood groups and residents associations, etc., which is fabulous, and it's really good that we're reaching out and we're connecting with them. And having sat on the housing panel, I can see, there is, really good work being done there, and within this, they're being listened to and heard as well. There are areas, obviously, of the city where we have kind of interspersed council housing, like in Poets Corner, which is my ward. We've got council housing kind of dotted all around Poets Corner. It's not a block or a kind of consistent area like an estate or something. So, and actually a few days ago I went to meet with a tenant there who is a very vulnerable tenant, an elderly tenant who lives in a council house in in Poets Corner, and they are feeling very, very unsafe and unsure, and they're very elderly and they were very distressed. And I'm just using this as an example, obviously. They asked me to speak for them. And when I tried to contact the neighbourhood teams that are set up, which are brilliant, by the way, it's a great idea, I was told they wouldn't interact with councillors. So I was just curious about that, because obviously sometimes, particularly the disabled people, and I've had similar reports when I've been to groups like Speak Out, where disabled tenants are, very concerned about speaking to people in authority. And if you go as councillor, they will ask you to speak maybe on their behalf. So with disabled people and maybe with elderly people who don't have residents associations or don't feel able to access them. So, that was just a point in terms of, can we find a way of helping them access some of the services that they might really, really need as some of the most vulnerable in the city. But I thought it was another excellent report. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Just to answer that quickly, so we do targeted visits for older tenants, and we also have our community engagement team who do a lot of outreach work in specific areas and do a lot of door knocking to really sort of engage with our residents and tenants to seek their views on specific things. So thank you. We do a lot of that targeted work, and it's really important that we hear from other people around the policy and their experiences.
Can you just explain why we can't talk to somebody on somebody's behalf? Even as a kind of introductory thing to kind of ease the process.
So as long as the tenant gives their consent for you to talk to the council services on their behalf, you absolutely can. If there's any specific cases or any concerns, then please do contact me directly. But if someone shares their consent and we've got that in writing, you're able to advocate on somebody's behalf.
Okay, thanks. Thank you, Justine.
Thank you. In this policy, we also encourage third-party reporting. So we'll take reports from wherever it's coming in, if people are concerned, and that includes anonymous reporting as well. And we are taking a victim-centred and trauma-informed approach. So we are hoping that this will encourage more reporting as the policy is launched. Okay.
Okay, thank you, Justine. Ellen.
Thank you, Chair. And thanks for this report. It was good to read, and I think the reporting piece is a really important place to be focusing on. In terms of what I've heard from residents over the last 2 years is that reporting has been the hardest bit about it, and action being taken off the back of those reports, or reports going missing. And that's not necessarily just with the council, that's with, reports to the police as well. And I would love to get a better understanding of how we can make sure that reporting can be done in a way where we give people a receipt, an acknowledgement that that report has been received. So there's a bit more of a joint up and a bit of a paper trail as to those reports were made, received, and something will start to be processed. And I think often in some cases, it's not always with ASB or this hate crime, but it's sometimes police will suggest in order for action to take place, it's a volume of reporting that's needed to build a picture. And I wonder if that is necessarily needed. I think advice and way we communicate with residents, it would be useful if they get a better understanding of what is needed, what is required, what type of evidence is needed. Is anecdotal evidence as strong as something where videos or photographs cannot be taken and captured. Often people don't want to do that because it puts them at risk, especially within a block where they might be identified as reporting. And then I was wondering, in terms of how we communicate this with tenants and social tenants, there's, I imagine, going to be an awareness campaign that goes through the area panels, but will it go further than that? And yeah, just really acknowledging that not a large part of the community will be attending those meetings. So how can we get it, the recommendations and the advice out to people so they know exactly what they need to be doing in terms of reporting and getting action on these issues. And then I just wanted to ask about monitoring as well, monitoring the effectiveness of this policy, and will there be public reporting invited at any point? Thank you.
So thank you, Chair. Thank you for the questions. I will do my very best to answer all of those. So absolutely, and we really recognise and through our consultation about the barriers of reporting, and reflected earlier about the challenges people have in terms of reporting, but also gathering the evidence. I think that's a really key point. And as our Chair communicated within the introduction, there's some elements that relate to the antisocial behaviour task and finish group and some of the challenges that people have reporting antisocial behaviour and some of the burdens around gathering evidence to support that. So thank you for those comments and really taking you on board. Just to answer some of those as best as I can. So in terms of those missing reports and those what happens to the reports, where do they go? A big part of the policy is introducing that senior officer oversight of reports to make sure that we've got that governance and accountability on hate incidents and ensuring that we are addressing them. We've talked already a little bit about the anonymous reporting and the different ways that we've introduced to really encourage our communities to report hate incidents. And I hear the comment about giving more information about how best to do that, and we'll consider that as part of our implementation. And just on that, and about how we're going to be promoting the policy. So there's lots we're going to be doing about sharing it within our tenants' newsletter, homing in, sending out emails to residents, putting up posters in our community rooms and different blogs, engaging with different stakeholders, including community groups, doing communication with our councillors, ward councillors specifically, and having leaflets. So there's lots of ways that we're thinking about how to promote it, but any other additional thoughts about how we can best promote the policy would be incredibly welcome.
Okay, thank you. Ellen, do you want to come back on that at all? No. Okay, thank you. Anne.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, and thank you for the report, Harry and Justine. Very clear. Very clear. You put on the screen how much effort you put into asking people to join the consultation, 4,500 texts and other bits, but there's still less than 0.5% of respondents, 0.4222 recurring percent. I just felt that that's quite a drastically low number, considering the effort you put in to get a response. We got, 13,500 tenants and leaseholders, and of that number, we got 0.5% back. Yet there are pages and pages in here, very clear text. I just think it's all too easy to say that the tenants and leaseholders, they're happy. Oh, they didn't respond because they're happy. I would be less inclined to believe that, knowing many tenants. They will talk, but to each other. They won't respond to consultations, especially formal ones. If there's any way of being identified, they just won't do it. So, and that then brings me on to, there was a gentleman who came along to another meeting, and the chair has already stated that he's coming along as a witness for something. But if someone reports problems within blocks or on estates, and everyone goes to them to report the problem, they're constantly reporting, they're then made to feel like they're a nuisance. And they are told that we can't deal with you anymore, we can't talk to you because you're taking up too much time. And I feel that that's actually a wrong approach for our tenants and our leaseholders. There are many, many tenants who will not talk to housing officers. They just won't. If you're lucky, you can get them to confide in a counsellor, but the majority of them talk to the one they feel safest with. And then they're the ones that are left out in the cold because they've been told they're a nuisance. And that's when we get all the emails from them. So I just think that while it's a great report, I'm not jumping up and down about it because I didn't read anywhere in there about what happens when someone's treated as a nuisance because they're constantly reporting issues. And I think less than 0.5% is not a guarantee that everyone's happy with what's in the consultation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. And it's a very valid point and one that we really wanted to highlight to the committee. We did a lot of work in the consultation period, but as you reflected on, the response rate was very low. And I think our thinking on that is more about it reflects the nature of hate reporting, that it can be very underreported. We're not taking that as a guarantee that our tenants are happy with this policy, but more the fact that we've got more work to do about how we engage with community groups. And we talked a little bit about the evaluation of the policy after the first year. So we're going to continue to take that learning approach to make sure that we're getting this right. So by all means, this isn't a fait accompli. We really recognise our response rate was low and there is more work for us to do. But there is real substance within the policy and the position to take forward. And then in terms of third-party reporting effectively through residents' association, I'm really sorry to hear about those experiences. We really recognise the roles that resident association reps play in shaping and supporting their communities. Third-party reporting isn't a nuisance and we really do welcome it. And I would really encourage any tenant reps to continue to report hate or antisocial behaviour. And if they feel like they're becoming a nuisance, they're not. They're representing their communities and that's really, really important.
Yeah. Just to come back, they didn't feel they were a nuisance. The council told them they were a nuisance. And I feel that undermines a lot of what's in the report.
Thank you, Councillor. It's a really important distinction and a big part of the implementation of the policy itself is around that training for staff and also those roles and responsibilities and that senior management oversight on hate. And again, I'm sorry to hear about those experiences.
Yeah, and just to comment on that, I think it was the gentleman who came to one of our ASB meetings, who talked about earlier, who also talked about training and said there are these policies and so on, but they're not always actually adhered to when dealing with people. So I think that is obviously something that needs work. And I have to say, I do agree with Anne. It can be incredibly difficult, especially when you have estates and so on, where people just don't want to talk to you. They do not want to talk to officers, and they often really don't want to talk to councillors either. Anybody in any kind of position of authority is often seen as could get them into trouble, will they understand? And so I would say they don't always even seek a third party. They just suffer in silence. And I do think that is a big issue. And I mean, I think I've said to you, got big estate in my ward. I've been a councillor for over 10 years. Really difficult, really, really challenging. And so, I mean, that's why you've only got 57 responses to the consultation. And I'm sure they're quality ones, but the point is they're not truly representative. And that's my worry. And I think probably a lot of people in this room, it is their worry. And so we're scrutinising, Harry, we're scrutinising.
Thank you, Chair, and it's a really important comment. And I think just to reflect Councillor Williams' introduction, there is no place for hate in our communities. And we're here to create inclusive neighbourhoods. And we really recognise that we haven't quite yet engaged with all of our tenants in the right sorts of way around this policy and that we do have more work to do. So I really welcome committee scrutiny on this particular part of the policy and really reflect the need to do more engaging with our communities around hate. We've got a lot of thoughts about our implementation, about how we can engage with residents groups, area panels, for example, to promote the hate policy. But thank you for the committee's comments.
I also think it's about integration, because there's quite lots of the disabled people and young people and, you know, people who were refugees and, you know, it's all kinds of people that are in these situations. And I don't think there's always enough work to actually bring them together. So I think that's the point as well. I know some areas do it brilliantly, because I've been to things up in Hangleton, always impressed when I go up there. But that's really what we need, I think. So I'll stop commenting, and I will now move to Anna Sweet.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, firstly, for bringing this to committee. It is obviously very timely. It is something as Bridging Change and CVG, that's the Community Voices Group. We have spoken to council housing colleagues previously, and the arson attack in Peacehaven reverberates much wider than just Peacehaven. It does across Sussex for all of us who hear of it. Specifically, obviously, our Muslim community, but also those of us who visibly look different. And what compounds it is a relative silence from the media nationally. Makes it really hard. I think I saw a passing banner in a couple of large news groups, pretty much nothing. It's just also to say that a lot of racialized minorities do not report hate crimes in general. And they just don't do it because it's normal and it just happens and you just move on. Don't make a fuss. I know this is a very specific remit, you know, but it would be remiss of me not to mention what I'm mentioning now, because there are a lot of people in the community who are really scared. And especially when there's heightened dangerous rhetoric going around, it's just really difficult. I just want to say I really do welcome the Easy Read survey that you've put in. I think it, you know, that was produced by colleagues Speak Out. You know, it has a broader resonance. I think it's really helpful, and I hope that's a consideration. You think of other information you put out. I think, you know, Easy Read is an excellent way for people to absorb information. And I think when we are all panicked or we're feeling fear, it's easier to look at sort of pictures and less language. It's not so overwhelming. So perhaps finding a way for people to access that more easily. In your consultation, you do sort of had a breakdown of engagements with groups from minoritized. I mean, I would be interested to know how many were from minoritized ethnic groups who were able to comment on your consultation. And you said you reached out to 100 community groups. I wondered how many had actually taken part and how many you had engaged with directly in a more personalised way to really try and get, especially those with equality groups across the board. It would have been really helpful just to see if you could mobilise that. Also, in terms of reporting, I really welcome the way that, you know, enabling reporting through third parties. And I would urge that you have consistent and structured monitoring and evaluation that you expect of them as well, something that allows them to do it. So sometimes I think, you know, there could be different ways of monitoring, and it would be good perhaps if you gave a template where you know what kind of information you're receiving back and what expectations within reason, because people sometimes do not want to disclose certain things. I do appreciate what Councillor Meadow said about the number of people who did. I mean, I do know doing surveys myself, it is really hard getting people and it is really difficult. But I wondered if it needed something different. It needed something a bit more involved in terms of the way that you engaged. And just to say more broadly about the policy, that, you know, victims and communities, you know, it was really important for them how they received feedback and in a timely manner. I think that would be really important, and not just a case closure, and possibly lessons learned and reassurance of action taken. And just lastly, about monitoring, your EIA, your quality impact assessment has says 75% of equalities data is going to be received. So I just wondered what kind of measures and how you're going to achieve that. One more thing, and it is the last thing. When you consider the comms for this particular initiative, and I know it's within a particular context, that, you know, around residents within council housing, if you consider
that messaging more broadly around how it impacts residents anywhere, whether they're in council housing or not. Thank you.
Sorry, thank you. Thank you for your questions. Quite a bit in there, and I'll do my best. We may come back to some of you. Come back to you on some of those questions, just some of the specifics in the data, but refer to what we've got within the report. I think really just important, first of all, that we condemn all hate crimes within our communities, and specifically recent local and national events about targeting faith communities. Just picking up on the first point that you made with the questions, and really hear the impact that this has had on our communities locally and nationally. And as a local authority and as a council, we really have that commitment to anti-racism and hold those values of a city of sanctuary. And just in terms of the equality data, so just to reflect a little bit, I'm just going to refer to Justine because I can't quite.
Oh, it's page 31.
Thank you. The data around is on page 31 of Appendix 2. And it outlines a bit more about the individuals who responded to the consultation. And 91% were responding as an individual, and 8% were responding on behalf of a group or an organisation. And 32% were 55 and over, and 26 were under 55. And although 42% of respondents to the consultation didn't answer on their ethnic origin, the most commonly selected categories were white English, Welsh, Scottish, Northern Irish, British, white other, Asian, Asian British, Indian, and mixed, and other mixed multiple ethnic background. All of the data is around in Appendix 2 of the report. Hopefully that answers some of your questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to go to TJ now.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I really want to thank you for this. I think the timing couldn't have been more on the nose to show that we are truly a city dedicated to stamping out hate in it, and it is really important that we have discussions and see this kind of stuff coming forward, especially after the last few weeks from news both from Manchester and from Peacehaven. So I really thank you for bringing it, and I do think it's quite good to have this conversation now. Few things I want to kind of ask you about. First of all, you say in the report kind of says, and you went through in the presentation earlier, that this report will also apply to people who are perpetrators of hate-related behaviour who are not our tenants, but the perpetrating conduct is motivated by hate and their conduct is having a direct impact on our housing management functions. So, albeit these are very fair and very good standards, I'm really happy to see it coming in. How are you going to communicate this to every person who lives near a council house tenant? And what powers do we really have apart from refer the situation to Sussex Police? And also, I can't remember who said it, but I had in my notes someone saying earlier that a lot of people who suffer some of these hate incidents will just shake it off. Oh no, it's happened. We'll just forget and we'll just kind of get on with it because they're so used to taking it on the chin. And part of their mentality, if this ends up getting reported and they get sucked into this, is, oh, I don't want to make a fuss. I don't want to dwell on it. Can we just get on and move on? So how are you going to work to make a culture where people can feel like they can report these and can engage with these without feeling like they're just causing a fuss and a scene? And how will you make sure that if someone genuinely just wants to kind of just forget it, move on, don't want to think about it, they will have the space to do that and won't be forced into a long-term investigation or situation that they don't want to be involved in. And I just want to kind of finish off very quickly with, it's a shame she's left because I was going to say something I don't think I've ever said before, which is I partly agree with Councillor Meadows when she talks about this 0.5% engagement, and I do think that's a massive shame that more people haven't engaged. But I was just going to say that I think this shows a much wider problem about people not engaging with consultations, not engaging with local government, not engaging in local policy, not being aware of what is available to them. And I just wanted to kind of comment that this is something I think everyone in this room has got to be better at picking up and kind of advertising and pushing in a world where we're being drowned out by national and international events that local services have just as much an impact on everyday life as well, and that we need to be engaging with it.
Thank you, Councillor. Really important questions, and I think really we do take a harm-based approach in our policy, and victim support is really key. So thinking about residents who aren't council tenants that are carrying out hate incidents, we're really listening to victims and really recognising that harm-based approach, and the support to victims is key. We also support perpetrators to change behaviour. That's a big part of our approach. How can we enable that behaviour change in perpetrators? We do work with partners in addressing hate incidents, including Sussex Police, but we do have our own powers as a local authority to address hate incidents. In terms of reporting, we have that victim-centred approach, and we do ask victims what they want as an outcome. So some victims may choose just to report the incident, some victims may wish to have a more engaged process. I really hear about how do we get those messages out as a community, and I think for me that's really about the work that we do on the ground in our communities. And I reflect on a residents association meeting we attended last night with our tenancy services team, where we were talking about our antisocial behaviour policy and the engagement and the discussion we had in that area, and the insights that our residents and tenants gained from us talking about our processes and our policy. So big opportunity to do that as part of this. We've really invested in our tenancy team and being able to take address these hate incidents. We've increased our staffing within the tenancy team this year, and we have action plans for all hate incident cases and a name contact for each case, and within that we agree communication preferences as well.
Thank you. Raphael.
Thanks. I'll try and keep this brief. Is there specific support available to, actually I've got 3 questions, but I'll keep this brief. Is there specific support available to children who are victims of a hate crime in council accommodation? Secondly, you've referenced Community Security Trust as a source of support. So I just wanted clarification about, did you contact them to comment on this strategy? And more broadly, are there ways in which there can be more engagement between Community Security Trust and services that engage with housing hate incidents? Obviously, in the context of, sadly, with anti-Semitism incidents becoming, increasing. And then thirdly, I think this point is a bit broader than this strategy, but I think there's something to be said about the fact that obviously we have a mental health crisis in this country, and people in mental health crises can often do things like commit hate crime, sadly. I'm all too familiar with this. So there's an issue around mental health ambulance wait times and acute mental health hospital beds. I think it's a bit outside of this strategy and what it engages with, but I think mainly the point I want to make is that there's a need for a joined up approach, and that recognizing that is something that has an impact upon our ability to respond to our residents in council accommodation and the needs that they have, and that when that's not responded to, it can lead to incidents like hate crimes. So I just wanted to more make that point. But yeah, if you could respond to my first 2 questions, they're a bit more targeted to the policy. Thanks.
Thank you for your question. So in terms of support for children, so we would provide support for the children and the family. So that might be things through our, working with a social worker that's with that family, might be with that family, working with other partners, but also linking with victim support, and that might have specific support available for children. So absolutely, we would consider support for that household, not just necessarily a particular victim within that household. And in terms of the organisations that we consulted with, I'm really sorry I didn't quite catch the name of that organisation, but they're listed on page 32 of Appendix 2. If you just repeat the name, forgive me, I might be able to answer now.
It's Community Security Trust. So it's an organisation that specifically deals with anti-Semitism and often provides things like security outside of synagogues. They're quite a well-known national organisation supporting the Jewish community, although they do work with other faith groups in particular.
Thank you for clarifying. To understanding, we haven't. The organisations that we reached out are local organisations rather than national organisations. That doesn't mean there's not an opportunity for us to engage with that organisation outside of the consultation process as part of that continuous learning and development on the policy. Thank you.
Yeah, of course you can.
I guess my point on that is that although they're a national organisation, they are active locally. So I think there's a real missed opportunity there. Just because they are national in terms of their scope doesn't mean they don't have a lot of local knowledge. And so I think it's worth engaging with Community Security Trust. If you're dealing with anti-Semitism, they're just the people that most people who are Jewish would naturally think of dealing with. When I've reported anti-Semitic graffiti, they were really active and supporting with stuff like that when I was dealing with that in, I think, 2019 or something like that. So yeah, just would recommend their knowledge.
Thank you for that, and forgive me, and thank you for clarifying a second time. Taken on board and appreciate that those comments. There were a couple of Jewish community groups that we engaged with as part of the consultation. So Brighton and Hove Jewish Community and Brighton and Hove Jewish Welfare Board were engaged with as part of the consultation, but appreciate the comments and the suggestions going forward.
Thank you. Thank you. Jo.
Thank you. I thought it was quite difficult reading actually because but I was wanting to commend you on being so transparent. The survey of people who'd actually been through the process at the council was not great, was it? So it's really good to see a clear action plan to address that. And I think that's something that it would be really good to repeat, that exercise of people's experience, and see if the action plan has made a difference. So really, in a way, I think I feel somewhat reassured when I see such transparency, because you know that, okay, we've taken it on the chin and we're going to do something about it. It leads me to say that when we're looking at hate crime policy, sometimes we're not always thinking about the focus on what unites us in communities rather than what divides us. And I wonder if there's something that should be underpinning this, which is around community cohesion, which is a wider policy for the council, because really the trust and engagement with residents, it needs some work. And that's something that definitely the community and voluntary sector can support and help with. We have a different sort of relationship and trust than the council. But I think it's also something that we can really work together on in a different way on the estate. So I wonder if we can, if appropriate, the action plan could include something that's more generic about community cohesion and about that broader trust and positive engagement in communities. So that was one thing. There was a couple of points about expanding the definition of hate crime that I thought was interesting, that had come back in the consultation. And I noted that Nottingham had chosen to make misogyny a form of hate crime. We have rising incidences of bullying, sexual violence, intimidation. It's a thought. I'm not actually sure, but I thought if it hadn't been considered, that it might be interesting to consider whether there's anything in that in order to support a broader range of people and build that trust, that if people are attacking you based on your identity or person, that you have a place to go.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for your comments, and thank you for the point around transparency. That's really important to us. We are here, and we really welcome your scrutiny and your comments on the policy. And I'm grateful for the entire session and the committee's engagement on the two items that I've been involved in this evening. And I think it's a really important point on community cohesion and a different perspective on it that I think Justine and I were reflecting quite strongly on when you were talking. So I really welcome that, and thank you for your comments. And in terms of the definitions, so yes, absolutely right. That was fed through within the consultation report, and there was a suggestion about including other identity-based categories, and that they weren't included within the policy. The thinking at the moment is that the 5 categories that we've included within the policy align with the council's broader hate incident policy. So just a reminder, this is a hate incident policy that talks about how we can address hate incidents in our council homes and our practices around as a local authority. This is about specifically how we do it within our council homes, and we've reflected what we do in terms of hate more broadly as a council. which uses the Home Office definitions of hate incidents. So we've aligned this policy to that. And I think it will form part of our continuous development and continuous review on the policy. And as we sort of go through, we'll monitor the types of incidents are reported, and if any sort of further categorisations become apparent through those reporting, we can reflect on that within the policy and make the changes as needed.
I messed up, or in fact, I didn't. There's a ghost in my machine.
Oh, right. Yeah, no, there often is ghost in the machine, which is deeply frustrating. Thanks, Joe, for that. I have to say, I support you on the community cohesion. I think that's incredibly important. And I think it's very lacking in parts of the city, and very strong in other parts. And one of the things I would say is so often there isn't anywhere for the community to gather. It's very interesting that the places which are very successful have places where the community gathers, because as I said, I've been to things in Hangleton and so on. And, that's a conversation that we need to have actually, because in some places there isn't anywhere even to meet, maybe more than 12 people. So I think that is an issue. So, Anne-Sri, you wanted to ask another question or two.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Councillor Hill. I think your reflections were really helpful, and it made me consider also about mental health in particular, and about what approaches you're taking when you receive some of these concerns and hate crimes or hate. Do you have like a multi-agency approach in the way that you deal with these? Because I think that would be a kind of a holistic way to to understand or unpack what's happening. But I'm sorry, in my monologuing, I think my questions got lost, and one of them was around the feedback loop that you have. I just wanted some clarity around closure and timeliness, and how you'll be reassured that's taken, how you're monitoring that. And the other one was around the EIA commitments, around 75% equality data being received, and I wondered how you would share that, and how that's going to look like. Thank you.
Thank you for your questions, and forgive me for missing the other ones earlier. In terms of mental health support and that multi-agency approach, so absolutely part of the work that we do with victims and also perpetrators of hate incidents is developing the action plan, and that will look at some of the underlying issues such as mental health and how we might be able to link in with mental health services to support behaviour change. And then in terms of that feedback loop, for me, that's a big part of that senior management oversight on reporting of hate incident cases, to make sure that cases are closed and that we're responding to victims when reports are made. And then in terms of the equality data, I think there's a bit more thinking we need to do around that, and about how we just make sure that we're gathering that equality data from reports of hate incidents to get a better understanding about who's reporting hate incidents and who's not, and then compare that against what we know about our residents in the city and our tenants, and see where there's pockets of underreporting, etc., etc. So there's more work, I think, for us to do on that particular part.
Thank you very much indeed. Well, I think that was an interesting discussion. It's obviously raised a lot of issues. I think the point that Anna-Sri made, and also that Raphael made, that comes up in antisocial behaviour. And you can end up with a situation, as we talked about in our recent meetings at the Task and Finish group, where you have somebody who feels they are the victim of either hate crime or antisocial behaviour, but the perpetrator has mental health problems or addiction problems and so on. And the victim can often end up feeling that the perpetrator has got more than they do, and that they're the ones who maybe have to move or they have to make adjustments. So I think that is that's the issue in that is how it gets dealt with. I know in antisocial behaviour, sometimes the victims actually have to move, and they get very upset because they think, why doesn't the perpetrator move? And they're always got mental health problems or whatever. So I think it's a challenge. I think it's definitely a challenge. And I see it's a challenge in antisocial behaviour, and it's a challenge in hate crimes, because there's actually not really a lot of room between two things, is there? So I know you're aware of that. Have you got any further comment on it?
You're absolutely right. It is a challenge, and I think we've reflected this evening about the pressure on mental health services and other services across the city. It is really prevalent within our communities, and we work as best as we possibly can with our partners to support our tenants with mental health issues. But it remains a challenge, and it will likely continue to be a challenge for the years ahead.
It's also about training of officers, and I think very good communication, because that's something that's come up in the antisocial behaviour as well. So that all these things, I think, make a big difference to how effective these things are. But anyway, thank you so much for coming. And Harry, you've really done a tour de force this evening. And I take my hat off to you. You've done brilliantly. And, you know, it's great to see both of you, and I know a lot of work has gone into this, and I think we all wish you well with this, because it's really important work. But we also recognise how difficult it is for you, but your commitment to it. So many thanks, and I think we now have to note this report. So can everybody please note the report? Noted. Okay, thank you very much, everybody. Thank you for all your questions today. Great questions. So thank you. And your attention.